Chapter 1434. Zhang Yi followed Sima Quan's plan and tried to go outside heavens beyond once every 10 days. He frequently turned the dial in an attempt to attract the attention of the other side. A month later, Sima Quan's clone came and said that it was done. Someone from the other side was coming to receive him and the news had been successfully delivered. Only then did Zhang Yi stop moving and become silent. These days, he had been going out of Earthstar a little too many times. He was afraid that he would attract the attention of some people. Although with his current status, no one would care about him, it was always good to be careful. On the other side, after Sima Quan received the news that Yang Chuan had gone to the Middle Heaven region, he knew that he must have gone to find trouble with Sanren Rao and Bei Xiangtong. And if this person was fast enough, the two sides might have already started fighting. He couldn't help but ponder. A battle between mortal metamorphosis cultivators wouldn't end in a day or two, especially Bei Xiangtong, who had always been cautious. The other imperial emperors of Yuliang cult didn't care much about their own heavenly region guards because it wasn't necessary. However, Bei Xiangtong was the exact opposite. He had been carefully operating in the left heavenly region for more than 1,000 years. Now, he had set up countless restrictive formations. In that case, it was possible that the battle would last for a year or even 3 to 5 years. But after Yang Chuan joined the Qi Accumulation Palace, even if Rao and Bei Xiangtong could use their geographical advantage to resist for a while, the difference in power was still there. In the end, they wouldn't be able to turn the situation around. He thought, I can't stay here for long, I need to go. With that thought, he flew out of the palace and turned into a stream of light, flying to the other side of Earthstar. A few days later, he landed in front of a palace. Deng Zhenjuan sensed his arrival and personally went out of the hall door to welcome him. When he landed in the sky, Deng Zhenjuan smiled and cupped his fists. He turned sideways and said, "Fellow Taoist Quan Ming is here, please come inside." Sima Quan gestured for him to follow him inside and asked, "How has Taoist friend been these days?" Deng Zhenjuan seemed to be in a good mood. As he walked, he said, "The 189 countries on this planet are now all willing to worship the Devil's doctrine as the Orthodox sect. The people under their rule will be my people in the future. I have already ordered them to select capable people to serve me. First, they can be used as a hostage, and second, they can strengthen the branches of our sect. Now we have 10,000 people, and there will be more in the future." When they first arrived here, they were still lacking in manpower. Most of them had to rely on the disciples that Sima Quan had previously nurtured. These people were more than enough to control an Earth star, but to control a heaven domain was a stretch. Thus, they had to recruit more people. Their current strategy was to promote people from the natives of Earth star, so as to spread the Devil sect's influence as soon as possible. Sima Quan sighed and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to stop for now." True Lord Deng was shocked and stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean, Dao friend Quan Ming? But the Qi Accumulation Palace has their eyes on us." That shouldn't be the case. Although the place they were at could be considered as within the Middle Heaven domain of Yuliangism, due to the weak spiritual opportunity, Yuliangism did not pay much attention to them in the past. Logically speaking, it was impossible for them to be targeted by the Qi Accumulation Palace. Sima Quan said telepathically, "I have received news that Yang Chuan has already gone to the left heaven domain. He might be fighting with the independent cultivator now. According to the independent cultivator's orders, if this person comes, we have to retreat first and not stay here for long." True Lord Deng was a little reluctant and said hesitantly, "It's not easy to open up the situation again. I don't want to abandon it again." Sima Quan advised, "The harvest this time is not small. The disciples that the independent cultivator found are all talented. As long as these people are here, and with the independent cultivator taking charge of the situation later, it will not be difficult for the Devil's doctrine to revive." True Lord Deng sighed and said, "It's a pity that we haven't found the occult orb of Yuliangism. Otherwise, it would save me at least 1,000 years of effort." Sima Quan laughed and said, "How can it be so easy to find it? I heard that Bei Xiangtong has also sent people everywhere to search for it, but hasn't there been any results?" Not only Bei Xiangtong, even he had sent many clones to search for the occult orb after knowing that the occult orb was true. But so far, there had been no leads. True Lord Deng also understood the principle of making a decision when it was necessary. The harvest this time was actually enough. As long as they were still alive, they could make a comeback no matter where they went. He said, "I'll go make the arrangements now." Sima Quan stopped him and said, "Fellow Taoist Deng, please wait a moment. Although we're leaving, we should leave some people behind to guard this place. In case the Qi accumulation palace doesn't like this place, we can still use them in the future." True Lord Deng thought for a while and said, "That's easy. There are many cultivators on this planet who have signed contracts with me. These people have absorbed the pure spirit, so it's useless for them to follow me. Let's just leave them here to guard the place for me. Even if they are killed by the Qi accumulation palace, it won't be a pity." Sima Quan said, "All right, let's do it this way." The two of them had been constantly chased over the years, so they were very experienced in escaping. In just a few days, they had sorted out everything and escaped into the depths of the void sky with the massive amount of cultivation objects and human beings they had collected. However, they didn't go too far. 2 months later, they found a drifting meteorite, took out the jade pot that Sanren Rao had given them, and escaped into the inner space. In this way, unless Yang Chuan sent an sovereign emperor to search for them, they would definitely not be able to find them. After arriving at the small world, the two of them followed Sanren Rao's previous arrangements and sent out their subordinates to build temples, open up herb gardens, and build earthly fire heavenly cauldrons. Compared to the outside world, this small world could be considered as their true foundation. Because it was created by Lord Yuhu, there were no sovereign kings in this world who could force their way in from the outside. It could be said to be very safe. The only flaw was that in order to avoid exposing their location, they could only go in once in a while to gather information from the outside world. Even if something big happened in Junqian world, they would only know after a long time. This time, Sima Quan only left the dual realm dial with him. The sky dial was sent by his clone to the vicinity of the Qi accumulation palace. Therefore, even if they couldn't go out at will, they didn't have to worry about the outside world. Because there was no conflict or chaos in the Jade Pot small world, it could be said to be very peaceful. They didn't feel the passage of time at all. The two of them stayed like this for 5 years. Suddenly, one day, an extremely familiar and huge presence entered the small world. True Lord Deng woke up from his meditation and said happily, "Sanren Rao is back." Sima Quan also sensed it and came out of their cave abodes. He looked up and saw spots of dark light falling from the small world. In the end, a tall and skinny Taoist landed on the ground. He quickly went forward and bowed to welcome them. Sanren Rao said politely, "Taoists, you don't have to be so polite." True Lord Deng said excitedly, "Previously, I heard that Yang Chuan personally went to attack the left heavenly domain. Taoist Quan Ming and I were very worried for Sanren Rao. Now that we see that Sanren Rao is fine, we can finally relax." Loose practitioner Rao said with lingering fear, "It's also luck. Yang Chuan isn't simple. He actually disregarded fellow Taoist Bei's restrictions and rushed to fellow Taoist Bei and I. Even when the two of us joined forces, we weren't a match for him. If we hadn't escaped in time, we would have been intercepted by him. For the past few years, I've been fleeing in void sky and was almost caught by him several times." True Lord Deng said in shock, "Is Yang Chuan really that powerful? Could it be that Sanren Rao couldn't beat him even if he summoned his true dragon form?" Sanren Rao shook his head and said, "Yang Chuan has the treasure of the Qi accumulation palace. No matter what kind of attack it is, it's useless against him. No wonder Kong Ying couldn't take him down previously. I've underestimated him." Sima Quan asked, "Sanren Rao was able to return successfully this time. Did you get rid of Yang Chuan?" Sanren Rao's expression turned solemn and said, "It's not that I got rid of him. Half a year ago, I felt a heavy pressure appear outside the heaven and earth gates. It's obvious that the cultivators of the 9 continents are coming again. Yang Chuan also felt it. He obviously didn't want to be entangled with me anymore, so he retreated first. That's how I got rid of him. True Lord Deng heard this and was worried. He mumbled, "The cultivators of the 9 continents are coming again." Sanren Rao looked at the two of them and said, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me into the main hall. I have something to discuss with you." Sima Quan and True Lord Deng saw how serious he was and knew that it was not a small matter. They looked at each other and followed him into the main hall. After they sat down, Sanren Rao dismissed all the attendants and disciples and said, "I've been thinking about one thing. The devil doctrine needs to expand and grow, and my strength alone is far from enough. I can only rely on a strong force." In the past, Yuliangism and the Qi Accumulation Palace were the strongest in the realm. Unfortunately, they can't tolerate me, so I need to find another way out. True Lord Deng said, "Now that the cultivators of the 9 continents are coming, why don't Sanren Rao ask Yang Chuan to allow the devil doctrine to expand? I believe he won't refuse for the sake of the big picture." Sanren Rao shook his head and said, "I've thought of that too, but Yang Chuan is selfish and narrow-minded. Even if he can survive this crisis, he won't tolerate me when he finds out about this." At this point, he paused and said, "If I don't join forces with Yang Chuan, I can only choose to join the cultivators of the 9 continents. Although I've made this decision, I don't know how they will treat me. Therefore, I'll have to trouble the two of you to continue hiding here. If anything happens to me, I'll need the two of you to inherit the devil doctrine's orthodoxy." Sima Quan's eyes flashed and he asked, "Sanren Rao, since you have doubts about the cultivators of the 9 continents, why do you still want to join them?" Sanren Rao pondered for a while and said, "After inheriting the old dragon's memory, I just now understand how powerful a person like Kong Ying is. If the cultivators of the 9 continents could defeat him, there must be such a person among them. Let's put it this way, even if I release the Gong brothers and join Yang Chuan with Bei Xiangtong, there's no hope of victory. Yang Chuan might survive, but the rest will definitely die. If I take the initiative to join them, there's still a chance of survival." Sima Quan was moved. According to Zhang Yan's instructions, if he could win over Sanren Rao, it would be a good thing. He was wondering if he should try to recruit him, but after some consideration, he felt that it wasn't the time to say it. If Sanren Rao changed his mind and didn't follow him, he would expose himself, and then he wouldn't be able to monitor him anymore. Moreover, the pressure that Sanren Rao was facing now wasn't great enough. He still needed to wait for the Shangzhen of the 9 continents to kill their way into the realm. Fortunately, based on the current situation, it wouldn't be long before that happened. Chapter 1435. When Yang Chuan sensed that the cultivators of the 9 regions had once again arrived at the Great Dust Realm, he decisively stopped the pursuit and called Jiang Kan and the other two back, preparing to return to the Qi Accumulation Palace to defend. The restrictive formation of the Qi Accumulation Palace was different from other places. The previous palace masters had put a lot of effort into it, and it could even resist Yuliangism. If it wasn't for this, he wouldn't have the confidence to go against the 9 regions. At the same time, he tried to pass a message to Bei Xiangtong and Rao Sanren, asking them to put down their past grudges and come to the Qi Accumulation Palace to fight against the enemy together with him. In the murky nightmare space, Bei Xiangtong and Rao Sanren were communicating through their divine wills. Bei Xiangtong said, "Yang Chuan's words are sincere and full of sincerity. He is also willing to sign a contract to ensure my safety. After that, not only will he allow me to occupy the Jade Beam Heavenly region equally, he will also restrict his disciples from stepping into our dojo. The condition is that we help him defeat the cultivators of the 9 regions." Rao Sanren sneered, "If we really fight this battle, the Qi Accumulation Palace will definitely lose. If we die, no matter how good this person is, all of this will not count." Bei Xiangtong agreed, "That's true. Even if they signed the contract, when the battle really started, who could say for sure what would happen? And at the critical moment, even if there was a little hesitation, or if they couldn't rescue in time, they could lose their lives." They had almost fallen out with Yang Chuan. Even if they fought against the enemy together, they would only be pushed to the front to die. He pondered for a while and said, "So, Daoist friend has already decided to join the 9 regions. Are you going to help when the two sides fight, or sit and watch?" Rao Sanran said, "There's no rush in this matter. There are still a few years before the people of the 9 regions enter the Supreme Realm. It's not too late to make a choice by then." Bei Xiangtong couldn't decide what Rao Sanran was thinking, but he didn't object and said, "That's fine." In the Qi Accumulation Palace, Yang Chuan stood in front of the map of the myriad heavens territories and looked around. "Brother Shang, where do you think this generation will end up?" Shang Zhou thought about it and replied, "Last time, these people landed at the Yuliang Middle Heaven Domain and destroyed 6 of the formations. That was to surround Kong Yin. But this time, they came with the momentum of victory, so they have no worries. It's possible for them to land anywhere." Yang Chuan moved his finger and pointed at a certain place, saying, "How about this place?" In the hall, Jiang Kan and the other 2 looked over and saw that the place he was pointing at was the Qianfeng heavenly region. Duan Su thought for a moment, then said, "Judging from what happened last time, the cultivators of the 9 continents have spies, so it's indeed possible that they've landed there." On the surface, the Qianfeng heavenly region seemed to be the weakest place in the Qi Accumulation Palace, but it was actually a loophole. If necessary, all the formations from that place to the main Qi Accumulation Palace Heaven Domain could be upgraded by 1 level in a very short period of time, and besides the 4 of them, almost no one else knew about this, so the possibility of the cultivators of the 9 continents falling for it was very high. Shang Zhou said, "If the cultivators of the 9 continents really come from here, we can catch them off guard." Yang Chuan said, "That's all. To win against this generation, we need to make other arrangements." He knew that this wouldn't be a problem for the cultivators of the 9 continents. At most, it could only use up some of the opponent's mana and cause some trouble, but it wouldn't change the overall situation. Duan Su cupped his hands and said, "Palace Lord, do you have any arrangements?" Yang Chuan said, "The 9 continents are far stronger than us, we can't fight them head-on, but if we can use formations to separate them one by one, we still have some hope of winning." Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, how many 9 orifices heavy dysprosiums do we have in the palace? Jiang Kan replied, "Originally there were 4, but the last time Kong Yin came, he walked around my formation and took 1, so now there are only 3. The so-called 9 orifices heavy dysprosium was a defensive artifact passed down through the generations of the Qi Accumulation Palace. It contained the will of the previous palace lord, and it didn't have much power by itself, but when used together with the formation outside the palace, it could temporarily trap the imperial emperors from outside, or teleport them to other places." Shang Zhou said in surprise, "Only 3 left? It can't even be arranged in 4 directions, the loophole is really too big." Although this item was very useful, it also had a big loophole. Once it was set up, it couldn't be moved in a short period of time. If the enemy didn't go through this place, then it would at most be a decoration. The Qianfeng heavenly region was so vast, it was possible for the cultivators of the 9 continents to come from any direction, so it was very likely that they would fail. Yang Chuan looked at the map of the Qianfeng heavenly region and said, "Now we can only gamble, we can put 1 in the Qianfeng heavenly region." Jiang Kan then said, "We can also put 1 in the palace." Although Yang Chuan was conservative, this was a fight to the death, so he didn't care too much. He said, "That's right, the people from other places might not go, but they have to come here. As long as we can win, so what if the Qi Accumulation Palace is destroyed? At most, we can just rebuild it in the future." Shang Zhou said, "Then where should we put the last one?" Yang Chuan thought for a long time, then finally pointed to a direction and said, "Put it here. Qijiang Heavenly Region." The 3 of them were a little surprised, because this location was a little remote, it could be said that the cultivators of the 9 continents would not go there. Duan Su asked, "Why did the palace lord choose this place?" Yang Chuan said calmly, "Waiting for the enemy to come to us is just a test of luck. If necessary, I can be the bait and lead them there." Shang Zhou suddenly understood, and said, "The palace lord's plan is brilliant." Jiang Kan said coldly, if I were a cultivator of the 9 continents and know that the palace lord is here, even if there is a trap in front of me, I won't care too much. The biggest difference between Yang Chuan and the others was that he had the supreme treasure of the Qi accumulation palace to protect him. No one could hurt him, and the real inside story was not known to outsiders. If he could make full use of this, he could indeed achieve miraculous results. Yang Chuan said, "Junior brother Jiang, I'll leave the 2 places to you." Jiang Qin said, "Yes." He was decisive, and after receiving the order, he did not stay for a moment longer, immediately leaving to make the arrangements. After he left, Shang Zhou and Duan Su looked at each other, then stepped forward and said, "Is there anything else that the palace lord needs to do?" Yang Chuan said, "What should be done has been done, the rest depends on the luck of the Qi accumulation palace. You can go now." There were only 4 emperors in the Qi accumulation palace, and with the absolute difference in strength, there was not much room for maneuver. Just now, the arrangement was already the most feasible strategy. Actually, things did not need to end up like this. According to Yang Chuan's original plan, as long as he subdued Bei Xiangtong and Rao Wanren, he could possibly find the Gong brothers, and then he could fight against the 9 continents. But in the end, he failed on the verge of success. After a while, he realized that Duan Su was still standing there, and said, "Is there anything else?" Duan Su cupped his hands and said, "Palace Lord, Rao and Bei are not willing to join the Qi accumulation palace, so it is very likely that they want to join the 9 continents. If they attack me together, I have to be on guard." Yang Chuan said, "I have already thought of this, but what can I do even if I know? I have no time to care about them at this moment." Duan Su frowned and said, "This is a big oversight." Yang Chuan laughed coldly. "Don't worry, these 2 won't come to attack me." Duan Su asked, "Why is that?" Yang Chuan said, "These 2 are not willing to be controlled by me because they are afraid of being used by me and losing their lives. But they are also afraid of being used by the cultivators of the 9 continents. At most, they will only watch from the outside. If they see that I have a chance to defeat the 9 continents, they will most likely come to help me. If I am defeated by the people of the 9 continents, they may hit me when I am down." Duan Su said, "I see. Palace Lord, you have seen through these 2. Yang Chuan waved his hand at him. Duan Su bowed and said, "Then I will take my leave." After bowing, he walked out, but in his heart, he sighed heavily. Facing the cultivators of the 9 continents who were about to attack, he actually wanted to stay out of it. But he had signed a contract with Yang Chuan, so he could only live and die with the Qi accumulation palace. At the same time, one of Sima Quan's doppelgangers had already arrived outside the main heaven of the Qi accumulation palace with the Tongtian Gui. But after circling around, he found that everywhere was heavily guarded. Only the Qian Feng heaven that he was most optimistic about was still the same. This instantly made him suspicious. He thought that this might be a loophole that the Qi accumulation palace had purposely revealed. But he did not change his territory because of this. Because if he went somewhere else, there was almost no possibility of him surviving until the arrival of the 9 continents' deities. Moreover, he could have reminded them about this matter after they arrived. He found a damaged meteorite here, and then he entered it. Soon, there was no movement from it. 3 years passed in a flash. In the virtual sky, there were waves of tremors. The entire Junqian world seemed to be trembling. In the end, the heaven and earth gate was suddenly torn open, and a giant kun rushed into the world. Sima Quan's doppelganger immediately woke up. He came out of the meteorite and saw the giant kun's figure from afar. There seemed to be 6 Taoists standing in the turbid light on its back. This time, the 9 continents' deities did not use the strategy of a surprise attack. Therefore, they did not split up and entered the world. Instead, they attacked together. Sima Quan took a glance and quickly moved his gaze away. He endured the spiritual vigor that shook his body and went forward. However, before he could get close, he was stopped by a qi dynamic. He felt that if he went forward, he would be crushed. He knew how powerful it was, so he stood still and bowed from afar. He said, "Greetings, Venerable Jinren." As soon as he said this, he felt a spiritual light fall on his body. He felt his body become lighter and the external force was gone. Then, a voice said, "Jinren Sima, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Please come closer and talk." Sima Quan said, "Thank you, Jinren Zhang." With the protection of Zhang Yan's mana, he could finally move forward and greet the 6 Jinren fan Tuesday. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Jinren Sima, how's the situation in Junchen world now?" Sima Quan roughly told him what he heard and said, "Yang Chuan is defending the Qi accumulation palace to the death. However, there are only 4 of them. The Gong brothers are imprisoned in the small world by Rao Sanren and can't get out within 100 years. Rao Sanren and Bei Xiangtong have the intention to join the 9 continents. This time, they seem to be prepared to watch without doing anything." Zhang Yan nodded. He could roughly guess what the 2 of them were thinking. As cultivators of Junchen world, they should not be willing to attack people of the same path in the world. At the same time, they did not have any hope for the Qi accumulation palace, so they chose to retreat. This was good news. Although the 9 continents had forces that could suppress Junchen world, it was better to have fewer opponents. He looked around and said, "Where is this?" Sima Quan said, "The Qi accumulation palace is ruling the Qi-Jiang heavenly region. However, this place seems a little strange." Chapter 1436. Zhang Yan looked into the distance and saw the stars in the sky. There was nothing strange, so he asked, "Enlightened Sima, is there anything different about this heaven realm?" Sima Quan replied, "After the Qi accumulation palace knew that all of you were coming, they set up restrictive formations everywhere. However, the other heavens were heavily guarded, and every step was filled with killing intent. Only this one was spared, as if it was intentionally spared. If it wasn't for the fact that I couldn't survive in other heavens, I wouldn't be willing to come here." Ing Chuanqiu said, "It looks like the Qi accumulation palace deliberately let you come here. But I have a question. Is this place far from the main palace of the Qi accumulation palace?" Sima Quan said, "Compared to the other heavens, not only is it not far, it can be considered close." He pointed. "If we follow this, we will reach the main star." Ing Chuanqiu looked over and said, "That must be a trap." The Zenrens nodded slightly. Although there was a saying in terms of strategy, it was impossible for the Qi accumulation palace to leave such a big loophole at their doorstep. This was because it was too risky. If they failed, there would be no way out. If it had been a small force, it might have done so in a desperate situation. However, the Qi accumulation palace was a big force with a long history. It had many hidden tricks in the main heaven, and it was far from the point where it would risk its life to fight to the death. Moreover, they knew that Yang Chuan was a conservative person. He didn't use such violent methods when he fought against Kong Yin, so they were more inclined to believe that this was a trap set up in advance. Jinren Meng bowed and said, "Master, do you want to go around the other realms?" Sect leader Qin said, "What do you think, Zenrens?" Shui Dingyuan thought for a while and said, "Although there are traps here, we don't know what's going on inside, so we'll avoid this place. Who knows if this person has similar tricks in other places? Since it's right in front of us, I think we should try to find out. If we can figure out what's going on, we might be able to break through, and the risk will be worth it. If not, we can always go somewhere else." Yu Xianshao said, "Being afraid of the enemy and avoiding the danger is not what we do." I agree with sect leader Shui. We can send a Jinren inside to find out what's going on. If anything happens, we can save them in time. He didn't think that the formations could do anything to them. In fact, there weren't many formations that could threaten mortal metamorphosis cultivators. At most, they could only hinder and consume magic power. However, the Qi accumulation palace had existed for at least 100,000 years, so it might have some powerful tricks up its sleeves. For example, the seal expelling formation could send people to outer space or some unknown place. Zhang Yan had encountered it during his battle with Kong Yin before, so it was not to be underestimated. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Why don't we leave this matter to fellow Taoist Xian Wu?" The divine beast Black Tortoise was an otherworldly spirit. As long as he didn't die, he wouldn't be killed. He was the best candidate to break through the formation. The true immortals also knew about this. After a short discussion, they agreed. Zhang Yan cupped his hands towards the Black Tortoise and said, "I'll have to trouble fellow Taoists to make this trip." The Black Tortoise let out a roar, and its body suddenly became illusory. Then, it collapsed and turned into a river of water, rumbling in the direction of the main palace of the Qi Accumulation Palace. Not long after Fang Xingdu arrived, rays of spiritual light appeared in the void and twinkled incessantly around him. This was actually the spiritual opportunity that was triggered when the formation energy was released. In fact, before these abnormalities appeared, the attacks from the formation had already landed on the divine beast's body. However, all of these were useless against it. It did not even manage to stop the divine beast from moving forward at all. At the same time, in the Qi Accumulation Palace, Yang Chuan suddenly felt something and immediately realized that someone from the 9 continents had broken into the array. He waved his sleeve and the scene of the array immediately appeared in the palace. Looking at it, he saw a wave of water rushing towards the array. It even faintly evolved into the silhouette of a half-turtle and half-snake. It looked extremely powerful. He snorted. The 9 continents had only sent one person into the array. Obviously, it was just a test. He did not expect the opponent to be so careful despite having such an advantage. Fortunately, he did not expect to succeed here. It would be great if he succeeded, but it did not matter if he failed. About 10 days later, the Black Tortoise seemed to have triggered some kind of restriction. A golden light fell from the sky, and its huge body suddenly disappeared. The true immortals sensed through their divine wills that the Black Tortoise had landed somewhere. Although it was not very dangerous, it was very far away from them. Mengzhen said in a low voice, "So it's a transfer formation. It seems that Yang Chuan's plan is to separate us." Xue Dingyuan said, "There are only 4 emperors in the Qi Accumulation Palace, including Yang Chuan. If they don't do this, it would be difficult for them to fight against me. This is definitely not the only place with traps. We must be careful when we come down." Sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk and swept it on the back of the giant Kun. He said, "Ingui, have you memorized it?" The giant Kun responded. It could see a trace of the future. After witnessing the changes in the formation, it would be able to sense it in advance if it came down and encountered a similar formation again. Since they knew that this place had such traps, the true immortals of the 9 continents would not force their way in. They decided to look for opportunities in other heavens. Thus, under Sima Quan's lead, they drove the giant Kun in another direction. 3 months later, they arrived at another heavenly realm. Sima Quan said, "There are a total of 11 heavenly realms surrounding the main Qi Accumulation Palace. In front of us is the Liangye Heavenly Realm. This place is neither too far nor too close, and the formations and prohibitions are similar to the others. There's nothing special about it. However, no matter which direction we go, we will eventually run into a primordial star. This object looks similar to an Earth star, but it's actually a defensive treasure refined by the ancestors of the Qi Accumulation Palace. I'm not sure what changes it has undergone. Once we pass this barrier, we will reach the true center of the Qi Accumulation Palace. Yang Chuan must be there at this moment." Ing Chuanqiu volunteered, "Let me go and check it out." After the true immortals agreed, he turned into a sword light and rushed into the formation. He spent more than 100 days circling around, but only after he found out most of the changes in this heavenly realm did he retreat. Because the formation here was biased towards defense, there was no transfer formation. Thus, the true immortals rode the giant Kun and rushed in. Yang Chuan sat in the palace and saw everything. He said to the servant beside him, "Pass down my order the 3 of them to guard the forbidden stars. Delay them as long as they can, and don't worry about exhausting their mana." Originally, he could have used his divine will to inform Jiang Kan and the other 2, but the enemy was too strong. He looked calm on the surface, but his heart was unprecedentedly serious and dignified. He didn't want to easily lose even a trace of his divine will. His strategy was to use the formation and prohibitions to exhaust the enemy's mana as much as possible. When the real attack came, he would use the transfer formation. He would send as many away as he could, and then he would wait for an opportunity to attack. If everything went smoothly, he might be able to kill 1 or 2 people. Then, he would fight and retreat to the red border heavenly realm. When he reached there, he could activate the transfer formation again. However, he also knew that even if he achieved all his goals, he couldn't defeat the cultivators of the 9 continents. Therefore, he had to escape to other places and use the accumulation of the Qi accumulation palace for hundreds of thousands of years to wear down the opponents. The people of the 9 continents traveled very quickly. After more than 30 days, they successfully passed through the Liangye heavenly realm. At this moment, they saw an earth star blocking their way. There were no mountains, rivers, or continents on it, but it was like a polished round stone. It was surrounded by sparse clouds, and there was a long-bearded Taoist sitting on it. He bowed to them from afar. Sima Quan said, "Dear true immortals, this is the Qi accumulation palace's high supervisor Shang Zhou." Zhang Yan glanced at the star and felt that it contained a huge amount of spiritual vigor. Not only that, there was also a trace of divine will in it. He looked at the Taoist for a moment, and his eyes flashed. He said, "This person is only formed by a trace of Qi vigor, his real body isn't here." Meng Zhen bowed to sect leader Qin and said, "Allow me to test it out." After obtaining permission, he floated down from the back of the great Kuan, and with a wave of his sleeve, a boundless wave of water that covered the sky surged forward and instantly enveloped the origin star. However, the origin star tumbled and turned within the wave, and it wasn't damaged in the slightest. The true immortals were slightly moved. The northern underworld true water that Meng Zhen used his mana could even wash away an earth star in an instant. They didn't expect that the star was not damaged at all, and they didn't know what it was made of. At this moment, the long-bearded Taoist on the earth star made a gesture and shook his sleeve. A few murky lights shot out and headed straight for Meng Zhen and the true immortals. The lights were extremely fast and arrived in an instant. A small flag suddenly flew in front of Meng Zhen and blocked it. On the other hand, all of them stood there without moving. Before the murky lights that were charging towards them could even come close, the Kun's body merely shook slightly before it suddenly vanished without a trace, as if it had gone to another dimension. Ying Chuanxiu suddenly said, "Did you notice that the star is slightly smaller than it was just now?" Shui Dingyuan said, "This star is like a great medicine." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "This illusory body is stored by the cultivator's divine will in advance, so it's not afraid of the external god suppression. All mana and spiritual vigor are based on the star. When these two are combined, not only does it not have any weakness, it can also unleash strength that is not inferior to one's own. With this thing, it's like there's one more emperor in the palace." He turned around and asked, "Jinren Sima, do you know how many stars there are?" Sima Quan replied, "There are at least 4. Zhang Yan nodded. To refine this thing, it was unknown how many precious materials and spirits were used. Only a sect that had been passed down for more than 100,000 years could spend so much money just now. Shui Dingyuan said, "This thing doesn't have any obvious shortcomings. It seems that only by exhausting it can we completely get rid of it." Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Then we'll move forward after exhausting this thing." If the 9 provinces were in a hurry to kill Yang Chuan, they would leave one person behind to tangle with him while the rest of them charged in. However, their strategy this time was to fight steadily and not disperse their strength. Therefore, they would rather clear the obstacles on the way slowly than do anything else. Even if Yang Chuan moved the rest of the stars here, they would still have the patience to clear them one by one, not giving the enemy any chance to take advantage of them. Chapter 1437. After Meng Zhen and the Phantom fought for half a day, the 9 provinces' cultivators noticed that something was wrong. Compared to before, the Yuan star was only slightly consumed. On the other hand, the illusory body formed from qi was slightly stiff and sluggish in the beginning, but as the battle went on, its eyes gradually became clear, and even its combat ability improved slightly. Ing Chuanqiu said in a deep voice, "If this goes on, the Yuan star will be completely consumed, and it will take several months for Meng Zhen to fight alone." He turned around and bowed to Yu Xianshao, "Master, why don't I go forward and help fellow Taoist Meng?" Yu Xianshao nodded and said, "That's good too. You don't have to worry too much about this battle. Even if there are more enemies coming, my fellow Taoists and I will block them." Ing Chuanqiu bowed once more and floated down. When he was halfway there, his figure suddenly transformed into a ray of light that swiftly lengthened and charged into the battlefield. Zhang Yan had been watching the battle from the outside. He found that the Yuan star was very strange. It was just a strand of divine will, but because of the huge spiritual vigor hidden in it as a shield, every time the divine will was consumed, it would be replenished again, and it would always be in a perfect state. Moreover, it was like a whole. No matter which part of the external force landed on, it would be withstood by the whole body. If I can get one of these things and understand its mysteries, I can use it to fight against the enemy or to guard the sect. In short, it can greatly strengthen my side's strength. It's even more useful than getting a forbidden star. This kind of thing was actually used to delay time and consume the opponent's power. Under certain special circumstances, it could have a miraculous effect. Of course, it was not without its flaws. Its speed was very slow compared to ordinary cultivators. If the opponent felt that he was not a match for it, he could run far away. If the 9 provinces cultivators relied on the advantage of the escape method and ignored it, it would not be difficult for them to go around it. However, the goal of this battle was to destroy the upper echelons of Great Dust World. If Yuan Xing was used well, he could be treated as an emperor. Since they had clashed, then they had to destroy him. Due to the addition of one more person to the battle, the consumption of the Yuan star increased. Under the joint attack of the two, the apparition was repeatedly broken. Even though the Yuan star's immense spiritual vigor could be regenerated, it could not perform its supernatural powers as it did just now. 3 or 4 days later, the Yuan star was only half of its original size. Moreover, as it gradually shrank, the power it could display became weaker and weaker, and it could no longer be compared to its initial state. Yang Chuan watched the changes in the battle from within the palace, his expression somewhat gloomy. Only 2 people from the 9 continents had joined the battle, and both of them were in the first-degree realm, yet they were already able to suppress an entire origin star. Furthermore, the rest of them had yet to make a move. If this went on, they would not be able to achieve their goal of exhausting the opponent. He thought for a moment, then used his finger to point at the heaven domain map and said, "Men, pass down my order. Tell the great imperial enforcer to place all the Yuan stars here." The person standing at the side was his personal disciple, Jiaing. He looked at the position, and all of them were facing the direction where the cultivators of the 9 continents came from. He couldn't help but be shocked. After a slight hesitation, he plucked up his courage and said, "Palace Master, if all the Yuan stars are moved there, what if the people of the 9 continents take a detour elsewhere? Wouldn't the main palace be in danger?" The Yuan star moved slowly. Once it was moved to a certain place, it could not be moved back in a short period of time. Yang Chuan looked at him coldly and said, "I have my own arrangements. Since when is it your turn to interfere? Get out of my sight." The disciple was drenched in cold sweat. He didn't dare to say another word. He bowed and hurriedly left to pass down the order. Jiang Kan, Shang Zhou, and Duan Su were driving the magical boat, hiding in the battle array, constantly paying attention to the actions of the cultivators of the 9 continents. After receiving the order, they only hesitated for a moment before using the token to activate all the Yuan stars. Using the array Dao, they moved to the back of the Liangye heavenly region as fast as they could. Over the past hundreds of thousands of years, almost every palace lord of the Qi accumulation palace would try to refine an origin star after they succeeded the throne. Apart from the ones that had been destroyed in the past battles, there were still 9 origin stars remaining, not the 4 that Sima Quan knew. If it was a huge force, apart from the few that the three of them could directly control, the remaining few had the Celestial Lord's divine wills in the palace, but they were no longer around. Every time they used their divine wills, they would not be able to use the spiritual vigor in the primordial star to replenish themselves. It was hard to say how useful they would be in battle. In the Liangye heavenly region, a few more days passed. As a sword light slashed down, the Yuan star that was only 1/10 of its original size was cut into two. At the same time, a torrential wave rushed over and completely turned it into nothingness. Once the spiritual vigor was gone, the illusory body of the qi dynamic also disappeared without a need for others to do anything. When everyone looked up, they saw that the void was empty, and there seemed to be no more obstacles on the other side. Sect Master Qin said to Meng Yining, Yang Chuan must have made some powerful arrangements near the main palace. You two can adjust your qi dynamic first. After you recover your mana, we will go forward. Meng Yining cupped their hands, then sat down and started to operate. Zhang Yan secretly nodded. They were not in a hurry to succeed. As long as everyone's combat power was in a perfect state and gathered in one place at any time, they would be in an invincible position. Unless Yang Chuan rushed out and fought with them, or used other means to stop them, he could only watch Meng Yining slowly recover their mana. He judged that as long as Yang Chuan did not give up, he would most likely make a move. Otherwise, what he did before would be useless. Soon, half a month had passed. Because it was not the time to use the pure purple spiritual vigor, Meng Yining could only rely on themselves to recover their mana. It would take a lot of time for them to fully recover. As for the rest of the spiritual masters of the 9 provinces, they had been adjusting their qi on the back of the big kraken, guarding against any possible attack. Suddenly, Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. His eyes flashed, and he turned his head to look at a certain place in the sky. He said, "They're coming." Not only him, but all the spiritual masters also sensed that there were several huge spiritual vigor coming towards them. However, they found that it was the Yuan stars again, and there seemed to be a lot of them. Yu Xianshao sneered and said, "Since they are coming together, let's deal with them together. That way, we won't have to look for them one by one." Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment and said, "These spiritual vigor don't seem to come from one place. Maybe we can intercept them separately." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "For the past 10 days, I've tried to investigate, but there's nothing in the surroundings. Actually, there are still formations set up in the dark. It's just that they haven't been activated yet. Yang Chuan has always wanted to use a shift formation to separate us, but there's no need to take this risk." After a few days, 8 Yuan stars appeared in front of the spiritual masters one by one. Zhang Yan noticed that there was an illusory figure on each Yuan star, so he asked Sima Quan, "Spiritual Master Sima, do you recognize these people?" Sima Quan said, "Except for Jiang Can and the other 2, I don't recognize the rest. Maybe they are formed by the qi of the past owners of these Yuan stars." Zhang Yan nodded and asked, "Is Yang Chuan not among them?" Sima Quan looked around and said, "But it seems that he is not here." Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment and said, "Such a sharp weapon can be controlled by a strand of divine will, but Yang Chuan did not appear. He must have some plan." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There must be a reason behind this. Maybe he is unwilling, or maybe he can't. At the moment, we are stronger than him. No matter what he has set up, we just need to suppress him." Yu Xianshao said, "Spiritual Master Zhang is right. There is no need to pay attention to these minor details. Let's get rid of the things in front of us first." Sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk and knocked on the back of the great Kuaning Gui. The latter raised its head slightly, and in an instant, everyone here, including the Yuan star in front of them, was dragged into the changes of the past and the future. Zhang Yan's vision blurred. He found that the people around him had disappeared, and there was only one Yuan star floating in front of him. On it stood a white-haired Daoran. At first glance, he found that the Doran's qi was deep and unfathomable. However, after sensing for a while, he found that the Doran's divine will was not strong. Instead, it was even weaker than Shang Zhou's divine will. It was like a weak flame that could be extinguished with a little pressure. He immediately realized that the owner of the divine will had died a long time ago, and only a strand of it was left here. It was like water without a source, and it could not withstand a large consumption. However, even if my divine will can suppress the Daoren, it won't be possible to wear it down in a short period of time. Moreover, I have to guard against it attacking me. According to the usual method, I know this weakness, and it will be difficult for me to use it. However, after thinking about it again, an idea came to his mind, and he felt that he could give it a try. He took a step back and shook his sleeve. A pillar of water rose from behind him, and then it charged forward. With a rumble, it seemed like it was about to absorb the entire Yuan star in front of it. When Daoren saw this, he immediately waved his hand, and a waterfall of energy instantly flowed down. Wherever it passed, the water was slightly dispersed, and the Yuan star was pulled out. Zhang Yan didn't stop there. He pointed with a finger and a Supreme Pure Essence True Dipper hit the old Taoist's body, instantly dispersing it. Before the old Taoist could materialize again, Zhang Yan let out a loud shout and circulated all the mana in his body. The power of the water light instantly grew several times stronger, and with a bang, the origin star was dragged into the water light. However, at this moment, he could feel a strong force fighting against him. The Yuan star was also faintly discernible in the water, and it seemed like it was struggling to get out. He sat cross-legged in the sky, and suppressed it with all his might. At the same time, he released his divine will to collide with the Yuan star. Although the divine will in the Yuan star was sent by the previous palace master of the Qi accumulation palace, he was no longer in this world, and could not take the initiative to transform into spiritual vigor. In order to replenish its own damage, it became weaker and weaker in the battle with him. It only lasted for 5 days, and it was completely destroyed, and the Yuan star lost control of its Qi dynamic, and became completely quiet. Chapter 1438. The light in Zhang Yan's eyes shone brightly, and his magic power surged. The watery light also retracted. After a while, the light disappeared, and he stood up again. He observed for a while. Although he had successfully suppressed the Yuan star this time, he had consumed some of his divine will. However, with the situation just now as a reference, it would not be difficult to subdue another 3 or 4 Yuan stars. He immediately communicated with the big Leviathan with his divine will, and the next moment, he appeared in front of another Yuan star. With a change of heart, the watery light behind him poured down from the sky. Just like the last time, he encircled another Yuan star in an instant. The suppression this time was slightly slower than the last time, and it took about 7 days. Just now, he had subdued the second Yuan star. He could have continued, but he did not. Instead, he adjusted his breathing at the same place. He guessed that Yang Chuan should understand that even if there were more Yuan stars, the threat to the 9 continents would be limited. This was because they could adjust their breathing and recover at the same place after getting rid of all the Yuan stars, until their combat power was restored to its peak before advancing. If the other party did not want to see such a situation, he would have a follow-up plan. He needed to reserve enough magic power to deal with sudden changes. After more than 10 days, under the attack of the 9 continents, 5 Yuan stars had been subdued. The remaining 3 Yuan stars had the divine will of Jiang Kan and the other 2 Yuan stars, but they were much more difficult to deal with. Because they were still in the world, their vitality was not exhausted, and their divine will was not broken. However, under the siege of the 9 continents, they could not hold on for long. At this moment, on the other side, Jiang Kan and the other 2 Yuan stars were sitting on the same boat, using their divine will to control the Yuan stars. The Qi activity illusions on the Yuan stars could be replenished with spiritual vigor, but this did not mean that they did not suffer any damage. However, this price was almost negligible compared to personally going into battle. Shang Zhou sighed and said, "The 9 continents are attacking fiercely, and we are already at a disadvantage. At most, we can only hold on for 3 to 5 days. Jiang Kan said, "The order that Palace Master gave us just now is that we must entangle the cultivators of the 9 continents and do our best to exhaust this person's magic power." If the origin star is destroyed and Palace Master still hasn't arrived, then the three of us will have to personally fight with this person. Shang Zhou tactfully said, Great Imperial Deacon, I am afraid this does not conform to the original plan. Jiang Kan said coldly, the battle situation changes rapidly. How can everything go according to one's wishes? Since the Palace Master has given the order, we must complete it. Duan Su was silent for a moment, then said, That's right. The strength of the Qi accumulation palace is inferior to the cultivators of the 9 continents. We can only rely on meticulous planning to weaken our opponents and accumulate our chances of victory. There can be no accidents during this process. Otherwise, we will lose without a doubt. I am willing to join forces with the great Imperial Enforcer to fight against this junior. Shang Zhou still felt that this method was too radical, but seeing that both of them agreed, he had no choice but to acquiesce. At this moment, a bright nebula was moving over from the depths of the void sky. If one took a closer look, it could be seen that it was composed of 1 big and 6 small Earth stars, and there were even golden chains connecting them. It was like a colorful rainbow, dazzling with starlight. On the periphery, there were densely packed meteorites of different sizes floating. This was the main palace of the Qi Accumulation Palace, the famous Xianlu Heavenly Palace of the Junqin realm. For more than 100,000 years, under the unremitting efforts of the successive palace masters, all the Earth stars in the heaven region were moved to one place, and together with the main Earth star, they formed this incomparably huge Dharma carriage. Not only that, but they also connected the spiritual vigor in the Earth star and set up a Chan star Qi accumulation imbalanced array that could be used to resist the attack of the Emperor. As long as the Heavenly Palace was not broken, the Qi accumulation palace would not be destroyed. After the rise of Yuliangism, it had attacked the Xianlu Heavenly Palace a few times, but each time, it was to no avail. Even someone as strong as Kong Yin did not really fall out with the Qi accumulation palace before wiping out all the enemies in the inner realm. This was because the foundation of this sect was too deep, and it was impossible to wipe them out in one fell swoop. At this moment, Yang Chuan was sitting in the main hall. Although he had a plan before, he did not expect the 9 continents to be so conservative even though they had such a huge advantage. This forced him to adjust the specific strategy at the last minute, and he took the initiative to urge the Xianlu Heavenly Palace to fight. In the blink of an eye, another 7 days passed. Jiang Kan watched the last origin star disintegrate, and he stood up from his seat. He said coldly, Since the origin star has been destroyed, it is time for us to go forward. Shang Zhou was about to agree, but his expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly stopped him, saying, Wait, Great Imperial Executive, the Palace Master has arrived. Duan Su turned his head and looked, saying, Since the Palace Master has arrived, we don't have to make decisions on our own. It won't be too late to take action after consulting the Palace Master. Jiang Kan looked at the two coldly, and without saying anything, he used his mana to urge the Dharma ship, and headed in the direction of the Xianlu Heavenly Palace. Such a huge heavenly palace was moving closer, and the 9 continents Shinran also noticed it from afar. They looked over, and at first, they saw a dot of light, but as they moved closer, they saw a ball of nebula that was overflowing with light. The spiritual vigor contained in it was like fire, vast, and blazing. Yu Xianshao raised his eyebrows, and said, Jinren Sima, do you recognize what is coming over? Sima Quan's mana was not as good as the Jinren's, and after looking for a long time, he said, Leader Yu, that should be the Xianlu Heavenly Palace, the main hall of the Qi Accumulation Palace. In the past, there were rumors that this palace could move around in the void. I thought it was an exaggeration, but I didn't expect it to be true. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, to combine several Earth stars into an instrument, it would take tens of thousands of years of effort, and the cost is even more unimaginable. Sima Quan sighed, it seems that the Qi Accumulation Palace's palace masters have always been building the palace's restriction, and they have never really stopped. It's just that outsiders don't know exactly how far they have gone, and this time we can be considered to have seen it for ourselves. At this moment, the big Kuan Ngui's body suddenly stopped, and it let out a muffled groan. Sect leader Qin's expression changed slightly, and he said, "There is a teleportation formation outside the palace's restriction, so Jinren must be careful later. Don't stray too far from Ingui, or else we won't be able to protect it in time." When the Jinren heard this, they all secretly raised their vigilance. Xue Dingyuan said, "Just now, in that battle, all of you have used up a lot of your mana, why don't you take a step back and rest for a while before fighting with him again?" Sect leader Qin said, "There's no need for that, it's not a good idea to fight head-on with this kind of instrument. This person has a treasure, and so do we. Wait for me to use the treasure that the ancestral master gave me to break it, but it's not easy to use this treasure, so I'll have to trouble all of you to protect me." Yu Xianshao said, "Fellow Daoist Qin, just do it, we'll hold this place." Sect leader Qin cupped his hands, and then said to Meng Zhen, "Jita, come and help me." Meng Zhen said yes, then walked to the opposite side of sect leader Qin, and sat down on the back of Big Kuan. After a while, the aura on both of them slowly rose, and after a while, a black pearl the size of a longan floated in the air. Sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk, and the treasure floated in the direction of the mysterious Sixth Heavenly Palace at a moderate speed. This was Qinsang School's treasure, the Void Essence Mysterious Cave. At this moment, with sect leader Qin's help, the second layer of the seal on it had been unlocked. If it was still on the 9 continents, then it would need several mortal metamorphosis cultivators to control it together, otherwise, if they were not careful, they would be buried together. However, it was different now. Sect leader Qin had already reached the second layer, and now he had the help of his eldest disciple, Meng Jita, from the side. With the help of the master and disciple, controlling this treasure was no longer a difficult thing. Long before they attacked the Qi Accumulation Palace, they knew that there were countless restrictive formations inside, and it was not easy to take them down. If they broke the formations step by step, they did not know how long it would take. Only by using the power of this treasure to break the defenses would they be able to save energy. Yang Chuan had been staring straight ahead. Seeing that the cultivators of the 9 continents did not hide, and seemed to have the intention to fight them head-on, he could not help but feel excited, and his heart was cold. The mysterious Sixth Heavenly Palace had been managed by more than 10 generations of sect leaders, and the formation was almost complete. With this backing, he could lead Jiang Can to fight, and even if he could not win, it would not be difficult for him to retreat and rely on the formation to recover his magical power. In this battle, if the Heavenly Palace was breached, then according to the previous plan, they would escape to the Scarlet Border Heavenly region, and use the arrangements there to fight again. If the Heavenly Palace still existed, and the opponent retreated, that would be the best. No matter what the result was, it would be a battle of attrition with the opponent. The Qi Accumulation Palace was rich, and he did not believe that the cultivators of the 9 continents could last longer than them. At this time, a disciple came to report, "Palace Master, the great Imperial Enforcer and the Supervisor have returned." Yang Chuan said, "Pass down the order, tell them not to come see me, just go to the various places to guard the formations." The servant received the order and retreated. Yang Chuan looked ahead, stood there with his hands behind his back, and quietly waited for the 2 sides to come closer. However, at this time, a warning suddenly rose in his heart, and he suddenly felt his chest tighten and short of breath, as if a great disaster was about to befall him. His expression changed unconsciously, and this feeling was more intense than ever before. Thoughts whirled in his mind, and he thought to himself, "Something is wrong. Could it be that the cultivators of the 9 continents have a powerful method to kill me?" This speculation also made him feel uneasy. After all, the opponent was an outsider, and he could not completely copy his previous experience, so he could not say for sure that they had such an ability. His gaze swept the surroundings while he tried hard to figure out what was wrong. Inadvertently, he caught a glimpse of a dark energy pearl flying over. It was clearly only the size of a longan fruit, yet it gave him a feeling of extreme danger. For an instant, it seemed as if the entire world was sinking in. It wasn't just that. As the dark energy pearl grew closer and closer, the feeling of danger grew stronger and stronger. Not good. At this time, he finally knew where the warning came from, but he found it hard to believe that the Heavenly Palace built by the previous palace masters could not block this object. However, when it came to matters of life and death, he was more willing to believe in his own intuition. Therefore, after struggling for a moment, he still stomped his feet, leaped into the air, and flew away. At the same time, he did not forget to use his divine will to inform Jiang Kan and the other two that they could no longer stay in this place. Jiang Kan and the others did not understand what had happened, but since there was an order, they had no choice but to leave. Yang Chuan went into the distance, but he still had a trace of hope in his heart. When he looked back, he saw this scene that terrified him. Along with the profound beads smashing into the mysterious six-sky palace, the entire palace was silently torn apart like a piece of paper, and one large and six small stars instantly collapsed. No matter if it was the dazzling brilliance or the 100 trillion starstones, all of them seemed to be attracted by an enormous whirlpool as they were thrown towards the same direction and vanished in the end. Chapter 1439. After Jiang Kan and the other two came out of the heavenly palace, they met up with Yang Chuan. They seemed to have sensed the movement behind them and looked back, only to see that the palace's great formation, which had been painstakingly built by the previous palace masters, had been reduced to nothingness in the blink of an eye. They were all shocked. Shang Zhou only recovered after a long while, his voice trembling slightly. "Palace master, what should we do now?" No matter who it was, after witnessing this scene, unless they immediately killed the mortal heart, they would inevitably feel fear and respect. Yang Chuan was also a little shaken. Even though they were only facing cultivators from the 9 continents, how could a cultivator who had such a magical treasure not have any background? How could he fight against such a strong enemy? The power of the Void Yuan Cave was indeed unbelievably great. At this moment, he even had the thought of letting go of everything and not going against the other party, but in the blink of an eye, he extinguished it. Among the previous palace masters of the Qi Accumulation Palace, although he was not the most outstanding, he thought that he was still qualified. The legacy of hundreds of thousands of years must not be destroyed in his hands. After all, he was the ruler of a region, so he quickly calmed down and said, "We can't do this, we can't fight anymore. Fire, retreat to the red border heavenly region, I have already made arrangements there. When we get there, we can deal with this person." Shang Zhou said worriedly, "Palace master, how can we fight against the treasure that destroyed the heavenly palace?" Yang Chuan snorted and said, "You don't have to be too afraid. This thing looks powerful, but it moves very slowly. As long as we avoid it in advance, we will be able to escape, won't we?" Jiang Kan said, "Palace master is right. That thing doesn't fly fast. As long as we are careful, it won't touch me. It's not suitable to be used in a fight." Duan Su said, "It's just destroying a palace, we are still here, and we have not lost. We will find a chance to fight it later." Shang Zhou did not speak, only looking at Yang Chuan. Yang Chuan's expression had already calmed down, as if nothing had happened just now. He said, "You're right. Our Qi Accumulation Palace has existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and we don't just rely on a single palace. There are also several heavens under our jurisdiction that our ancestors and teachers have left behind. I'll activate them in a moment." Even though he spoke casually, the destruction of the mysterious six-sky palace was undoubtedly a huge blow to them. It was not something that could be erased with just a few words. Sighing in his heart, he released a spiritual boat and said, "Leave this place." Jiang Kan followed the 3 of them onto the magic boat, and shortly after, a streak of light flew toward the red border region. On the other side, once the mystic 6 heavenly palace was destroyed, sect leader Qin and Jinren Meng worked together to guide the void essence mysterious cave back slowly. They also cast spells on it, trying their best to pacify the spiritual vigor on it. The Zenrins stood in all directions, guarding the 2. After traveling for a few days, Zhang Yan saw 5 origin stars floating around. Although the divine wills on them were exhausted, if they were taken back by the people of the Qi Accumulation Palace, they might cause trouble for their side. He spread out his watery light and kept all the origin stars. He also informed the Zenrins through his divine will that he would bring them back and discuss how to deal with them. Shui Dingyuan transmitted his divine will. It's a pity that we can keep the origin stars, but the Mystic Six Heavenly Palace has used a lot of manpower and resources, yet it can't be used by the 9 continents. Zhang Yan smiled and said, the Mystic Six Heavenly Palace was also built by the ancestors of the Qi Accumulation Palace. If sect leader Shui likes it, after we subdue this world, as long as we pluck enough precious materials, we can also build it. Shui Dingyuan shook his head and smiled. It said that this palace was built for 100,000 years. Isn't that too long? Zhang Yan smiled and said, as long as our cultivation is enough, 100,000 years is not that long. Shui Dingyuan nodded slowly. Indeed, it's not long. Ing Chuanxiu listened to their conversation and said, it's just that once this palace is destroyed, Yang Chuan and his subordinates will scatter and hide, not daring to fight with me. It won't be easy to chase after them. The giant Kun could travel through the void. If it was only chasing after Yang Chuan, there was no need to worry about him escaping. However, if the 4 of them scattered and hid, it would be a lot more troublesome. Zhang Yan smiled and said, if that's the case, we only need to keep an eye on Yang Chuan. We can ignore the others for now. After we kill this person, Bei Xiangtong and Rao Jifeng will most likely come to the 9 continents to protect their lives. We can leave this matter to them. Ing Chuanxiu thought about it and nodded. That's a good idea. At this time, the Void Yuan mystical cave had already floated back to sect leader Qin. He swept his horsetail whisk and kept the treasure. Then, he lightly tapped Ing Gui's back and said, after them. The giant Kun was activated by him, and with a slight sway of its body, it instantly broke through the void and chased after Yang Chuan and the others. The Zenrens only felt the scenery in front of them change, and they could already see the flying boat in front of them. Under sect leader Qin's instructions, the giant Kun was not in a hurry to get close, but just followed behind. The Zenrens ignored the enemy in front of them and sat down cross-legged to regulate their breathing. Just now, the battle with Yuan Xing had consumed a lot of their transcendence energy. Now that they were chasing after the enemy, they could use this opportunity to recover their cultivation. When the giant Kun escaped from the void, Yang Chuan had already sensed it. He had not given up on the idea of defeating the enemy, so he let the cultivators of the 9 continents follow behind him. However, when he looked back, he saw the Zenrens sitting on the back of the giant Kun. How could he not see that they were trying to recover their vitality? Even though he knew this, he did not dare to turn back and fight, so he could only pretend that he did not see it. Shang Zhou sighed and mocked himself in his heart. When Kong Ying escaped that day, he was probably in the same sorry state. 20 days later, Zhang Yan was the first to recover his transcendence energy. He saw that the boat carrying Yang Chuan and the others had not changed direction, so he asked, enlightened Sima, how many heavens are there from here? Sima Quan replied, if we follow this path, we will pass by 3 heavens. The closest one is the blazing fire heavenly domain, which we will reach in a few days. After passing through it, we will reach the Chezhang heavenly domain, and after that, we will reach the farthest Qijiang heavenly domain. These 2 heavens are far away from the Qi accumulation main palace, so it is difficult for this sect to reach them. I heard that there are not many disciples stationed there. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Yang Chuan would not run here for no reason, and even at this time, he still had not given up, so there must be some arrangements there. He asked again, enlightened Sima, in your opinion, how long will it take to reach the Qijiang heavenly domain? Sima Quan thought for a while, if we do not change our current path, then it will take a year. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. This was good. It would not take a year. In a few months, everyone's power would be restored, and by then, they would be able to deal with any situation. Inside the flying boat, Shang Zhou left the cattail hassock and came to Yang Chuan's side. He said in a low voice, Palace Lord, we are about to pass by the Chezhang heavenly domain. Do you have any instructions? Yang Chuan opened his eyes and said, I remember that there is a small array path that the 3rd Palace Lord buried here. It can help me cross to the severe frost heavenly domain. Go there later. Shang Zhou was startled. If they were going forward now, then the severe frost heavenly domain would be behind them. The two could be said to be completely different. He asked Jun Chen, "Are we not going to the Qi-Jiang heavenly domain?" Yang Chuan said indifferently, "Of course I will go. However, just now, I think it is not the right time." Shang Zhou did not know what he was planning, but it was not good to disobey the palace lord's order. He said yes and asked for the location of the array path. Then, he steered the boat and turned in that direction. The cultivators of the 9 continents naturally did not know where he was going, so they followed. Another few days passed, and Shang Zhou said, "Palace Lord, we have arrived." Yang Chuan looked up and saw a scarlet chain gradually traversing the void in front of him. This small array path could only be opened by him, the Palace Lord. Thus, with a flick of his finger, a talisman flew out. The scarlet chain was overflowing with spiritual light as if it was alive. Then, he steered the boat and drilled into it. In an instant, it crossed the void barrier and moved to another heavenly domain. However, not long after, he suddenly felt a vibration of spiritual vigor behind him. He knew that the cultivators of the 9 continents had caught up to him again. He immediately ordered, "Hurry to the array path of Dugai heavenly domain." He told Shang Zhou the location of the array path. Shang Zhou did not ask much and immediately acted according to the order. The reason why Yang Chuan did this was that after several observations, he found that the cultivators of the 9 continents could catch up to him completely because of the strange beast that looked like a big fish. They did not have any other means. The aura of this beast was similar to that of Kong Ying. Moreover, after hearing the words of Jiang Can and the other two, it seemed to be able to predict the changes of the past and the future. This was also why the Yuan Xing was easily destroyed by the cultivators of the 9 continents. He judged that this strange beast should be an important support for the cultivators of the 9 continents. Therefore, he decided to take it around the various domains of the Qi accumulation palace to take care of its origin. After following him through several array paths, the cultivators of the 9 continents gradually saw some clues. Shui Dingyuan said, "This one is wandering around the various heavenly domains. He must be planning to wear down Daoist Ingui." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "That's easy. Although the Qi accumulation palace occupies a lot of heavenly domains, the number of array paths won't be many. Every array path that we see will be destroyed. Let's see where else he can go." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "Let's act according to Hall Master Duzhen's plan. Let Yang Chuan escape first. When the spiritual masters have recovered their magic power, we will go forward to fight him." After passing through 9 array paths, Yang Chuan turned back to a certain heavenly domain. There, he took a treasure left by the former palace master. When he was about to move forward again, he received a message from a disciple of the palace. It said that the array paths that the spiritual boat passed through had been destroyed by the cultivators of the 9 continents and could no longer be used. He was already prepared for this, so he was not surprised when he heard it. In fact, under the rule of the Qi accumulation palace, he also had a method to travel back and forth without relying entirely on array paths. However, when he sensed it now, he found that the aura of the big Kun had not decreased at all. Obviously, it had not consumed much energy along the way. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. After thinking for a moment, he decided to give up and said, "There's no need to go around in circles anymore. Go to the Red Border Heavenly region. You and the others rest well. When we get there, we will act according to the situation." Chapter 1440. After traveling for about 3 months, Yang Chuan felt that the auras of the people from the 9 continents were getting stronger and stronger. It was obvious that their magic power was about to reach its peak. He knew that he couldn't wait any longer, so he made use of a few small formations and jumped several times, finally landing in the Red Border Sky region. Net along the way, they had concealed their auras, hoping to delay the 9 continents' cultivators from finding them. But reality proved that it was useless. The great Kun Ingui didn't just rely on auras to find enemies, but also observed the past. As long as it was a living being that was still in the present world, its every action would leave a mark, and it could find them. If one wanted to guard against it, unless they never met face to face, or if they had someone more powerful than the Great Kun to cover them up, once they were remembered, they couldn't get rid of it. In the past, Kongying was able to accurately find the emperor hiding in the wild desolate sky region because of this. But this time, Yang Chuan left a clone in front of each formation gate. This couldn't stop the 9 continents' cultivators, but it could delay them. Shang Zhou saw that they were in the Earth realm, and knew that a battle was inevitable, so he asked, "Palace Lord, where should we meet the enemy?" Yang Chuan shifted his gaze and looked in a direction, saying, "Let's go there." Shang Zhou turned the boat, and after a while, he saw a huge star stone in front of him. It was light gray, and its surface was rough and uneven. There were many tiny holes on it, and it looked like a beehive. He looked again and was shocked. Is this the nest of the python scale fish? Yang Chuan said, "Yes, it is. Don't panic, I moved it from other places. Right now, these insect monsters are sleeping, and they won't come out to hurt people." Just like the mountain and sea realm's void sky had Yuan Hun and eyeless monsters, the Junqian realm's void sky also had many strange creatures. It was just that after hundreds of thousands of years, the various heavenly realms in the realm had been stable, and the great divine ability cultivators of the various sects had been constantly exterminating and absorbing the starlight. Now, as long as there were cultivators, there were almost no traces of these monsters. They could only be found in some of the more remote savage heavenly regions. And those that could survive were mostly monsters that were not to be trifled with. The python scale fish was one of them, and they were extremely ferocious. The python-scaled fish worm tribe kings could contend with imperial emperors, but they had a special characteristic. Once they died, as long as one of their tribe members was still alive, they could infuse all of their essence into it and become the next tribe king in a short period of time. This process could actually be prevented, but if someone who didn't know about it fought them for the first time, it was likely that they would suffer a great loss. Duan Su said, "Palace Lord, you want to use the fish to fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents?" Yang Chuan said, "Even with the help of the formation, the 4 of us can't beat them, so we need some help." The cultivators of the 9 continents had launched a surprise attack, and the cultivators of Yuliangism were forced to deal with the enemy. They didn't even have time to take out some of their powerful treasures. But they were different. They knew that the enemy was coming, so they made ample preparations and used all the means they could. There were many good things in the Qi accumulation palace that were stored in the Xian 6 Heavens Palace, but with the destruction of the palace, they were all destroyed. Shang Zhou asked curiously, "I heard that these monsters are crazy, and no one has ever tamed them. How did you make them listen to you?" Yang Chuan said, "There's no need to make them listen to me, as long as they don't go against us." He waved his sleeve, and 3 pills flew out. These are pills made from the corpse qi of the fish insects. Eat them, and when they wake up, they won't see you as enemies. The 3 of them knew that these fish insects were not to be trifled with, so they took them immediately. Yang Chuan said, "All of you wait here." He walked forward alone, and when he reached the top of the nest, he opened up a small world portal, and took out a large amount of medicinal liquid from it. He then poured it on the nest. After a while, he felt a weak qi dynamic coming from inside, and he knew that the nest was waking up. Although he had already taken the pills, he didn't want to stay near the nest. He returned to the spiritual boat, and met up with the 3 of them. Then, he waited there quietly. After a while, the void in the distance shook, as if there were ripples on the surface of the water. The next moment, the huge body of the giant Kun leaped out, and there were 6 Taoists standing on its back. The spiritual vigor was magnificent. Yang Chuan understood that at this point, there was no point in saying anything. He was not going to lower his head to his opponent, so he didn't say anything. He reached out his hand and immediately activated the restrictions in the heavenly domain. Rays of spiritual light flashed and flickered. Sect leader Qin made a hand sign, and suddenly, there was a whirlpool, and the sea flowed. The formation and spiritual vigor outside collapsed layer by layer. Every time it tried to gather, it was always suppressed, and it couldn't move forward at all. Yang Chuan never thought of winning by relying on the formation. He just wanted to restrain the opponent a little. He took out a hand sign, and a hole opened up in the void. It appeared and disappeared from time to time, and rays of evil light came out from it, attacking where the others were. This was the heaven-concealing void-revolving evil hole. This magical ability was both offensive and defensive, and its power was not small. However, just now, when it arrived in front of the experts of the 9 provinces, the big Leviathan slightly raised its head, and all the light disappeared in an instant. When Jiang Kan and the other 2 saw this, their expressions couldn't help but change. Yang Chuan snorted and put his hands together. With his palms as the starting point, a layer of air barrier suddenly appeared in the void. In an instant, the entire world seemed to expand. It was as if a large transparent mirror had appeared out of thin air. However, it was boundlessly vast, and its boundaries could not be seen. Thousands of starlight shone into the interior, but inexplicably gathered into a ball. This magical technique was called heavenly return to space. Those who had a lower cultivation level than him couldn't avoid it, and would be covered by it. If he didn't break this technique, the opponent wouldn't be able to attack him, but he didn't have such a restriction. Even he himself did not know when he had cultivated this art. He only knew that he had inexplicably learned it after he took control of the magical treasure in the palace. This feeling, it was as if a part of his memory had been erased, and it was also as if it was forcefully imprinted in his heart by an external force. When the air barrier appeared, it was originally vertical. However, with the activation of his magical power, it gradually flipped forward and pressed down. Sect leader Qin used the divine will of the giant Kun to take a look, and saw that the air barrier was almost a manifestation of his heart, between substance and illusion. He didn't know the changes inside, and thus couldn't break it. Thus, he waved his horsetail whisk, and instead of dealing with the magical technique that was coming at him, he directly shot a ray of lightning towards Yang Chuan. Yang Chuan stood still, and his whole body suddenly changed. He suddenly returned to the appearance of a young man, but in the next moment, he turned into an old man, and then changed back to a different age. But when the lightning came, it flashed through his body, and didn't touch him at all. It was clear that he had used the root fruit. The 9 provinces were a little surprised. Normally, if a mortal cultivator fought, the difference in cultivation level between the 2 sides wasn't that big. As long as their vitality wasn't exhausted, they could fight endlessly. But once the opponent's strength was calculated, no matter how abundant one's vitality was, it was useless. Unless it was a 3rd stage cultivator like Kong Yin, he wouldn't do this unless it was a critical moment. But at this moment, it seemed that Yang Chuan didn't care about this at all. Zhang Yan tried to make a deduction, and he was slightly surprised. He found that this person's root fruit was changing from time to time, and he couldn't find it at all. He thought to himself, could this be the method to fight against Kong Yin? He already knew that Yang Chuan had the protection of a treasure, but he didn't know what it was exactly. Now that he saw it, he kind of understood why this person could lead the Qi accumulation palace to last so long under the oppression of Yuliangism. The other spiritual masters also noticed the hidden changes in this person's body, and they couldn't help but frown as they thought of the key to this. At this moment, the air barrier had already pressed down, and it swept past Zhu Zhen's body, but the defensive treasure didn't react at all. Sect leader Qin, Yu Xianshao, Zhang Yan, and the others didn't feel any changes, but Xue Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ning Chunqiu felt that something was wrong. They found that they were clearly standing in the same place, and they could see each other, but they felt that Yang Chuan was going infinitely far away. After conveying this situation to everyone through the divine decree, sect leader Qin said, "Ingui, are you able to break this technique?" After a while, the big Kun replied. Sect leader Qin said, "This person can only use this technique with the help of some kind of treasure. Although Ingui can break it, it won't be done in a short period of time. The 3 of you don't need to be entangled with him. Go find the remaining 3 monarchs of the Qi accumulation palace and fight them." The 3 of them nodded, and went to find Jiang Kan and the others. When Yang Chuan saw this, a 9-hole arrow appeared on top of his head. It was the 9 orifices heavy arrow. If it hit the enemy, it would be able to move the enemy to a faraway place. He pointed a finger at Meng Zhen, and it turned into a golden light. Meng Zhen felt that there was something wrong with this object, and he didn't dare to let it hit him. He turned and dodged it, but the golden light still followed him. Yang Chuan sneered. Previously, he had lost all the Yuan stars, but he didn't exhaust much of the magic power of the cultivators of the 9 continents. However, it wasn't like he didn't gain anything. Through this battle, he had a better understanding of the characteristics of most people's techniques, and he knew which person was the most suitable to target. At this moment, even if he couldn't hit Meng Zhen, he could force him to not move forward. Just as the two sides began to fight, a ferocious aura suddenly overflowed in the field. The nest of fish and insects began to tremble, and crimson figures shot out from the holes in the nest. If one looked carefully, they would see that they were ferocious creatures with wings on their backs, long and narrow bodies, and blood-red eyes. They were not large, only the length of an arm, and as soon as they appeared outside, they began to scurry about in the air. Because there were too many of them, from afar, there seemed to be huge clouds in the sky. These fierce creatures ignored Yang Chuan and the other cultivators of the Qi Accumulation Palace, who were close at hand. Under the control of a violent will, they immediately split into groups and rushed toward the cultivators of the 9 continents. Chapter 1441. These fish and insects lived in the void sky and usually fed on starlight and spiritual opportunity. If necessary, they would also invade the Earth star to devour the flesh and blood of living creatures. The dazzling spiritual aura of the cultivators of the 9 continents was very attractive to them. Yang Chuan and the others didn't look for them because they had taken the pill. Although the strength of each fish and insect was not strong, each of them was separated from the king of the insects. Moreover, their divine will could spread to every race. Therefore, although there were hundreds of millions of fish and insects, they could be regarded as one. The cultivators of the 9 continents felt that these insects were a threat to them, so they didn't dare to underestimate them. They all took out their protective treasures and waited cautiously. At this moment, the big Kun raised its head and wanted to show its might again. However, sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk and calmed him down. He said, "There's no need to waste energy on these insect monsters. Breaking that Qi barrier is more important." The big Kun let out a muffled sound and lowered its head again. At this moment, Yu Xianxiao took a step forward and shouted lightly. Then, a myriad of sword lights flew out from his back. They turned gracefully and crisscrossed in the air. Every strike of his sword would definitely hit one insect. The swarm of insects seemed to be very powerful. However, more than half of them were killed in an instant. Seeing the sword lights, Yang Chuan couldn't help but be shocked. He was deeply afraid. At the same time, he sneered. The fish and insects were chosen by him, so how could they be killed so easily? After a while, the broken limbs that were floating in the air slowly wriggled and turned into fish and insects again. Looking at the number, it seemed that there were more fish and insects than just now. Zhang Yan glanced around and sensed for a while. Immediately, he understood the reason and said, "So these insects can borrow the power of the sun, moon, and starlight." He thought that the best way to deal with these insects was to block the light of the stars. However, this method was not only troublesome, but also easy to deal with. The people of the Qi Accumulation Palace would definitely try to destroy it. Therefore, he could only be led by the nose. Therefore, he decided to use his own method. With a turn of his magic power, a grand water light appeared behind him. With a sweep of the light, more than half of the fish and insects were sucked into it. The water element true light could even absorb the Earth star. Not to mention these ordinary insect monsters, it seemed like he would be able to wipe out all of them after a few more rounds. Just now, the python-scaled fish-worm king that was buried in the vast planet had just woken up from its deep slumber. Its chi of vitality was slightly insufficient, and it was bathing in the starlight. It was initially prepared to gather more spiritual vigor for itself so that it could recover faster. However, when it sensed the changes, it could no longer care about accumulating spiritual vigor. With a roar, a fierce and brutal chi dynamic spread out, and the worm nest suddenly collapsed. Ferocious monsters with heads like sharp awls and bodies of tens of thousands of miles long appeared. There were hundreds of pairs of pearl-like eyes on its back, and the 14 pairs of membranous wings on both sides could absorb the sun, the moon, and the starlight, turning them into majestic essence chi for its use. In just a few breaths, its body had doubled in size. At the same time, scales were peeled off and turned into fish worms. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. He could feel that even though there were so many demon insects, the chi dynamic of this ferocious monster was not reduced at all. Obviously, it had consumed very little of its energy. Continuing to absorb it with the water element true light obviously could not solve this problem completely. Thus, he said with divine thought, this demon king's flesh, scales, and armor can turn into worms. If we don't kill it, I think we can't kill all the worms and their descendants. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, this ferocious monster is a great disturbance to our generation, let's get rid of it first. As he spoke, he raised his sleeves and waved again. There was a boundless tide that gushed out and pushed the demon insects away involuntarily and rolled them far away. Yang Chuan was prepared a long time ago when he saw this, and he withdrew a magic treasure that was like a bamboo flute before tossing it into the sky. With just a spin, strands of flowing cloud and clear chi descended, causing the flow of water to instantly slow down and open up a path within it. The fish and insects struggled to escape from the flow of water, and they fought to be the first to leap into the path and move forward along the path. Zhang Yan took a small breath and blew out a mouthful of clear cloud chi. Most of the demon insects were instantly sent away by the cyclone. At the same time, he waved his sleeves, and the water element true light swept out and swallowed the remaining demon insects. At this moment, on the other side, Xue Dingyuan was about to go forward and fight Duan Su. However, when he saw the demon insects gushing out, he was very cautious and didn't continue to go forward. Instead, he watched from the side for a while. When he saw Yu Xianshao, sect leader Qin, and Zhang Yan attack one after another, he noticed that although the demon insects were ferocious and their bodies were extremely strange, their souls were extremely weak. This was also very natural. All the demon insects' essence, chi, and divine souls depended on the demon insect king to survive. They didn't have much intelligence. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive by bathing in light and nourishing their souls. Cultivators of the spiritual gate were best at attacking the divine soul. Seeing that there was an opportunity, Xue Dingyuan thought for a while and took out the spirit tablet. After a while, wisps of mirage chi appeared on the tablet and turned into clouds that spread out in front of them and gradually spread into the distance. The demon insects had low intelligence and were not much different from ordinary demon insects. As long as the demon insect king commanded them, they wouldn't retreat even if there was a sea of fire or a mountain of swords in front of them. However, the next moment, the demon insects' divine souls were disturbed by the mirage chi. They suddenly became crazy and began to bite each other. That wasn't all. As the mirage chi spread, even the demon insect king became more irritable. It even looked at the people from the chi accumulation palace with hundreds of pairs of eyes on its back. Yang Chuan's expression changed slightly. He didn't expect such a change. If this demon insect king would attack its own kind, then it wouldn't let them go. Although he wasn't afraid, Jiang Can and the others were still surrounded by the demon insects. There were also the 9 continents in front of them. If they were targeted by the demon insect king, the situation wouldn't be good. He realized that the problem was with the clouds and tried to disperse them. However, after trying 5 or 6 methods in a row, he found that none of them worked. Xue Dingyuan's method was based on the Great Spirit Tablet, and it was a spiritual sect method. If one wanted to break it, they needed to understand its profoundness. It couldn't be solved by pure mana. Seeing this, Yang Chuan had another thought and withdrew the magic treasure in the sky. He no longer blocked the surging tide and tried to use it to send the demon insects away. Sect leader Qin saw through his intentions immediately. With a wave of his horsetail whisk, the water in front of him suddenly stopped and rose. It was as if a wall of water had been built in front of him. The demon insect king had already fallen into an illusion. With a flap of its wings, a large number of demon insects around it were killed. It turned around and rushed towards Yang Chuan, who had the most spiritual vigor. Shui Dingyuan didn't expect it to succeed so easily. The demon insect king looked fierce and strong, but its spirit was weaker than he had imagined. He sighed in his heart and said, "It's a pity that none of the Taoists from Jiuling sect have reached the mortal shedding realm. Otherwise, I could use the 9 spirits banner to snatch the body of this demon insect king and use it for myself." He looked over and saw Yang Chuan standing there with a cold expression. No matter how the demon insect king tried to bite, it passed through his body as if it was just an illusion. He realized that Yang Chuan was using his spiritual vigor as bait to delay the demon insect king so that the rest of the people in the Qi accumulation palace wouldn't be attacked. Since he knew this, he wouldn't let Yang Chuan have his way so easily. He clasped 2 fingers together and activated the sea serpent Qi. The demon insect king was disturbed by the spiritual vigor and the illusion in front of it changed. It immediately abandoned Yang Chuan and rushed towards where Shang Zhou was. Shang Zhou was annoyed by the rampaging insect monsters around him, but he was worried about the king of fish insects and he couldn't kill them, so he could only try to chase them away. When he saw the king of fish insects coming over, he was shocked and quickly fled. Yang Chuan's expression turned ugly. He felt like he was trapped in a trap of his own making. However, he was able to move the demon insect king's nest over because he had a backup plan. However, he wasn't willing to use it just like that. Sect leader Qin saw the opportunity and said, "Although we can't hurt Yang Chuan, he can hurt me. Hall Master Du Zhen, please cover for us. Sect leader Yu and I will help Jida and the others to cut off his followers, then we will find a way to deal with this person." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Zhenren, don't worry. Leave this to me." Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and flew away with Yu Xianxiao. They each found Jiang Can and Duan Su. At this moment, although Taoist Master Meng was being chased by the 9 Orifices heavy spear, Ying Chuanqiu was fighting with Jiang Can, and Shang Zhou was being restrained by Shui Dingyuan's fish insect king. As soon as Qin and Yu joined the battle, it suddenly became a 3 versus 2 situation, which greatly favored Jiu Zhou. In fact, this was very normal. Originally, Jiu Zhou could suppress the Qi accumulation palace in terms of strength, and the latter could only use all kinds of methods to make up for this gap. If there was any mistake, it could lead to the deterioration of the situation. Seeing that the situation was not good, Yang Chuan hurriedly took out the incantation gesture and used the divine sense to launch a ball of qi toward Ying Chuanqiu. However, halfway through, he saw a big hand that seemed to be able to grasp the sun and the moon reach out and grab the qi. He looked up and saw Zhang Yan standing in front of him with his sleeves behind his back. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. When they met last time, he felt that this person was not to be trifled with, but he didn't expect that this person could easily block his divine sense. Once again, he used the Tian Sung Void Evil Cave. In the void, there were many holes, and thousands of evil lights shot out like arrows. Zhang Yan knew that if he dodged, it would definitely give Yang Chuan time to deal with others, so he had to block it head-on. However, the range of the evil light was so wide that it couldn't be covered by the big hand of Xian Qi. Therefore, he used his mana, and an earth element true light climbed up behind him, blocking the evil light. However, at this moment, he found that there was a ball of qi around his body out of thin air, and it firmly wrapped around him. There was an infinite force coming up to his body, and it kept pressing inward. He immediately knew that this was a fixed method. Yang Chuan's eyes flickered, and he chanted an incantation gesture. A big net of silver threads flew out, turned into a boundless expanse, and fell down. As long as this treasure covered the enemy, it would not be easy to break free. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and with a call in his heart, the heaven and earth leaf had already flown out, and a layer of golden light was laid on top of it, almost covering the sky. With this block, the big net naturally couldn't fall. Then, he swayed slightly, and took a step forward, and had already broken free from the qi around him. Chapter 1442. Yang Chuan saw that Zhang Yan had broken free from his shackles in an instant, and knew that he had no other way to restrain him. Seeing that the situation was unfavorable for him, in order to free Shang Zhou, he decided to deal with the fish worm king first. Net with a gloomy face, he flicked his sleeve and a talisman flew out. The talisman had been planted on the fish worm king when it was asleep. Once the talisman was activated, it could be controlled. He pointed 2 fingers at the talisman, and the fish insect king suddenly trembled. Its body was wrapped in a thick layer of spiritual light. At the same time, its spiritual vigor was leaking out at an extremely fast speed. Not long after, the monster's movements became stiff. After a while, the membranous wings retracted back into its body, and it quietly floated there without moving. As soon as the Worm King fell silent, all the fish and insects lost their vitality. They became stiff and soon stopped moving. Shang Zhou heaved a sigh of relief when he was no longer entangled by the fish and insects. He turned around and saw that Jiang Can and Duan Su were in the midst of a bitter battle. He hurriedly took out his artifact and stepped into a streak of light, rushing forward to assist them. Xue Dingyuan sensed for a moment and sighed in his heart. The spiritual vigor of this fish worm had dried up in the blink of an eye, and it had already fallen into a state of half-dead. No matter how amazing his illusory realm was, it wouldn't be easy for him to make use of it. However, he wouldn't let Shang Zhou escape so easily. His figure flashed, and he transformed into a streak of light that flew over and intercepted Shang Zhou halfway. Zhang Yan did not pay attention to the changes in the venue. Zhou had the upper hand here. As long as he restrained Yang Chuan here, the Qi accumulation palace would have no chance of winning. Because he was a body of strength, he was not afraid even if he used powerful techniques. No matter how Yang Chuan attacked, he was blocked by him. After fighting for a few days, Xue Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ning Chuanqiu suddenly felt their bodies lighten, as if they were freed from something. When they looked over, they saw that Yang Chuan was once again standing in the same void. How could they not know that the spell that was bothering them had been broken? Sect leader Qin saw that the Qi barrier technique was dispelled and knew that they had passed this trial. He attached great importance to this technique because even though he had only used it on Xue Dingyuan and the others, he might be able to use it on him, Yu Xianxiao, or Zhang Yan. If Dozhan was struck by this divine ability at a critical moment, he would be in an extremely passive position. Therefore, he would rather not let the giant Kun participate in the battle and find a way to break this technique. Since the giant Kun had neutralized this technique once, there was no need to fear it the next time. With a guidance of his spirit intent, he connected with the big Kun and said, "Ingui, you can use your divine arts to subdue the enemy." Receiving his instructions, the great Kun let out a low roar and instantly enveloped everyone present within the changes of the past and the future. Once this method was used, Jiang Can and the other 2 were immediately isolated, unable to see each other. On the contrary, the experts of the 9 continents were not separated. They were still in the same realm. At this moment, they could use the power of the great Kun to besiege any one of them without fear of others disturbing them. However, they did not attack immediately. Instead, they all used their spirit intent and leaped into the unknown realm to discuss who they should deal with first. Xue Dingyuan suggested, among the 3 of them, Jiang Can has the highest achievement. Jiang Shangzhou is the second, but the difference between the 2 of them is not big. The weakest one is Duan Su. I think we can make things easier for him first. Sect Master Qin said, "Then let's take this person first." None of the experts objected. They were powerful now, so it didn't matter if they were weak first or weak first. At this moment, Zhang Yan thought for a while and said to Sect Master Qin, "Sect Master, disciple thinks that we should continue to restrain Yang Chuan. Even if this person has a treasure that can rotate the root fruit, he can't use it limitlessly. Disciple is prepared to keep a close eye on him and not let him relax." Sect Master Qin thought for a while and nodded slightly. He said, "Let's do as Hall Master Duzhen says." After everyone finished their discussion, their divine wills returned to where they came from. The Kun let out a long roar and in an instant, they saw that Duan Su was the only one in front of them. They all used their divine powers and artifacts to attack him. There was no suspense when 5 people besieged one person. Duan Su had no choice but to hold on to the root fruit to evade. Sect Master Qin used the Kun's divine intent to calculate and found the location of his root fruit after a few days. Duan Su was forced to change the root fruit, but not long after, he was calculated again. At this point, there was no way for him to escape. He could only continue to move. However, this was like drinking poison to quench his thirst. After a few days, his vitality was almost depleted and he could no longer hold on. He let out a long sigh and let the opponent's attacks land on him. His whole body was broken and exploded into countless spiritual lights. As long as a mortal metamorphosis cultivator had a little vitality left, it was possible for him to return to his original body. Therefore, the experts of the 9 provinces did not stop and continued to eliminate the remaining spiritual vigor. Not long after, the wisp of qi finally dissipated. He was completely killed. Sect Master Qin and the others adjusted their breathing and communicated with the Kun using their spirit intents. The next person to find was Shang Zhou. This person's cultivation was not low, but he did not have the protection of Yang Chuanzhuan's root fruit. How could he be a match for the experts of the 9 provinces? After a few rounds, he felt that he could not hold on anymore. He realized that fighting to the death was not a solution. Holding on to the root fruit, he turned into a ray of light and jumped out of the battle circle, trying to escape into the depths of the void. When the cultivators of the 9 provinces saw this, they were happy to see it. They rode on the Kun and chased after him. From time to time, they would use their treasures to greet him. Shang Zhou understood that if this continued, he would definitely exhaust his vitality first and let his opponent take advantage of him. Therefore, he gritted his teeth and turned back to fight again. However, 10 days later, he followed in Duan Su's footsteps. Yang Chuanzhuan realized that Duan Su and Shang Zhou's qi dynamic had disappeared one after another. He knew that it was not good. Now that only Jiang Ken was left, he would be the next one. After Jiang Ken was dealt with, it would be his turn. Originally, he planned to retreat while fighting if he could not succeed here. He would rely on the rich accumulation in the Qi accumulation palace to compete with the opponent. However, at the last moment, he had some misgivings. Although he had the protection of the treasure, every time he used the treasure, he was very nervous. He was afraid that he would disappear without a trace like his predecessors. Forget it. Since I can't win against this person, I might as well use the chance to break into the outer space and see if I can find a chance. This was the last choice he had thought of. However, the void primordial sea was not a good place to go. Although he was not afraid of the innate chaos extinguishing vital light, there were many void mutants there. Moreover, he could not cultivate there. His cultivation would only decline and not improve. It was not a good thing to stay there for too long. Unless he could find a realm that could provide shelter for cultivators. However, this was easier said than done. If he could find it, why would he stay in the Junqian world? However, going to the outer space would save his life. If there was a chance in the future, he could come back. He did not believe that the cultivators of the 9 continents would stay here forever. However, to go to the outer space, he had to open the door of heaven and earth. If there were people of the same generation to disturb him, he would not be able to escape no matter what. Fortunately, he had the protection of the treasure. It could be said that he was untouchable, so he could do this calmly. After weighing the pros and cons, he finally made up his mind. He took out a spell and circulated it for a moment. A crack suddenly appeared in the void. He raised his head and looked at Zhang Yan. Then, he looked into the distance and said coldly, "Since the 9 continents are powerful, I will leave the Junqian world to you. I hope that you will take care of it. I will take it back in the future." After that, he snorted and waved his sleeves. He flew towards the door of heaven and earth in a ray of light. However, halfway through, he was shocked. At this moment, he was shocked to find that the treasure that had been protecting him had suddenly disappeared. Not only that, even his vigorous vitality and spiritual vigor had become empty. It was as if there was only an empty shell left. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the treasure could only be obtained by becoming the palace master of the Qi accumulation palace. When he made the choice to leave this world, it was obvious that the lives of millions of disciples were in the hands of the cultivators of the 9 continents. This action was equivalent to giving up the position of palace master. The treasure would naturally not recognize him as its master. When Zhang Yan saw that Yang Chuan had escaped to the outer space, he was already thinking about how to guard against him in the future. However, he suddenly found that Yang Chuan was not moving anymore. Moreover, the aura of his body had suddenly dropped to an extremely weak state. Zhang Yan thought quickly and guessed that something had happened to the treasure that Yang Chuan had. His eyes flashed. Previously, he could not stop Yang Chuan. Now that there was a chance, how could he allow Yang Chuan to escape? Therefore, he stretched his hand forward and used the 5 elements escape technique. At the same time, millions of sword lights flew out according to his will. In an instant, they crossed the void and slashed Yang Chuan's body. In an instant, Yang Chuan's Dharmakaya was destroyed. As soon as Yang Chuan's aura was cut off, the heaven and earth gate closed with a loud bang. Seeing this, Zhang Yan made up his mind. If there were no more changes, then Yang Chuan would not be able to escape. He put 2 fingers together and operated all the supernatural power in his body. In an instant, his aura grew. After a short while, he shouted and pointed to the sky. A Tai Xian Qing Yuan Han Tru Gang flew out and hit the spiritual lights. Immediately, more than half of them were worn down, but the remaining ones were still trying to gather. He flicked his sleeves and was about to take advantage of the situation and sweep it away when he felt a divine will coming over. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. After thinking for a moment, he also released his divine will. In an instant, he was in the unknown space. He saw that Yang Chuan was standing in front of him, but he looked uncertain, as if he could disappear at any time. He cupped his hands at Zhang Yan and said, "My Qi accumulation palace has lost this battle. I am willing to offer all the occult orbs and cultivation items in the palace to you. I hope that you can keep my Qi accumulation palace's orthodoxy." Zhang Yan said calmly, "As long as the cultivators of the Qi accumulation palace are willing to submit and swear not to go against the 9 continents, then I will not kill you." Yang Chuan's expression relaxed. He bowed and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Then, he told the location of the occult orbs and the place where the cultivation items were stored. After the treasure left, his vitality was already insufficient. Moreover, he was injured by Zhang Yan's divine art. At this moment, he was barely able to communicate with Yang Chuan's divine will. After he finished speaking, his figure disappeared. Zhang Yan knew that he must still be hiding something. However, he did not care about this. As long as he got rid of these sovereign emperors, the Junqin realm would fall into the hands of the sects of the 9 continents. Compared to the vastness of a realm, these were just small benefits. There was no need to be serious about it. With a thought, he also withdrew his divine will. Seeing that the spiritual light in front of him was only a little bit left, he flicked his sleeves and a flash of lightning flashed, completely wiping it out. To be continued. 8. Chapter 1443. Reeks, when Yang Chuan died, a wisp of his aura disappeared from the world. When Jiang Kan sensed it, his heart sank. He knew that he had lost the upper hand. However, he was a tough man and did not beg for mercy. He was determined to fight to the death. At this moment, he suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if there was a voice in the dark urging him to return to the Qi accumulation palace. It also told him that as long as he could be recognized as the palace master by billions of disciples, he would be able to inherit the treasures passed down by the previous palace masters. However, he was currently being attacked by the true cultivators of the 9 continents. Even though he knew this, he could not do it. The reason why the treasure chose him was because he was the most suitable person to inherit the position of palace master. Even if he died here, as long as the Qi accumulation palace was not destroyed, the treasure would naturally choose the next suitable person to be its master. Forget it. With the occult orbs and those disciples who have hidden their identities, even if all the disciples in the outside world are killed, the legacy of the Qi accumulation palace will not be severed. At that time, the treasure will find someone to entrust it to. Thinking about this, he did not think about it anymore. He cut off his mortal heart and tried his best to fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents. However, the difference in strength between the two sides was huge. The result was already decided. After 7 days, his aura disappeared. The true cultivators of the 9 continents put away their treasures and slowly calmed down their magic power and spiritual vigor. With the death of the last emperor of the Qi accumulation palace, the two great forces of the Jun-Qin realm, Yuliangism and the Qi accumulation palace, were no longer able to compete with the mountain and sea realm. Although there were a few emperors left, they were no longer a threat. At this point, the strategy that the cultivators of the 9 regions had previously decided to control the Jun-Qin realm and make it a lower realm had been mostly successful. The next step was to find out the whereabouts of the true Yang Great Demon. Once they came to a conclusion, they would send a group of cultivators to conquer this place and completely occupy it. Sect leader Qin and Yu Xianxiao discussed for a while, then called the true cultivators over to discuss the follow-up matters. After the discussion, Sect Master Qin waved his horsetail whisk and the heavenly territory map of the Qi accumulation palace appeared. The places with dazzling lights were all where Ziqing's spiritual vigor was located. He said, Jinren, you can go to these places to recover your mana first. We'll discuss the date of return in the future. Although there was a limit to how many spiritual opportunities there were, even if all the cultivators of the 9 continents went all out, they still wouldn't be able to obtain all of it within tens of thousands of years. If by that time, there was no one who could fight against the true Yang Great Demon Beast, perhaps they could only reluctantly give up. Before the result was determined, they would take as much as they could. Zhang Yan walked to the side alone and invited Sima Quan over. He said, Sage Sima, I still need to trouble you with a matter. Earlier, you said that Rao Jifeng had the intention to pledge allegiance to my 9 continents. Today, you can try to convince this person. If he is willing to pledge allegiance, you can bring him to see me. Sima Quan said, I have the same intention, I will do it in a moment. Zhang Yan said, there is one more thing. Currently, the disciples of the 9 continents have not arrived yet. You need to dispatch your trusted subordinates to guard the various array paths. Without my order, no one is allowed to pass through. Sima Quan thought for a while and said, although I have many people under my command, this matter is not easy. It would not be difficult for ordinary disciples to stop them. What he was worried about were those perfected lords. If they wanted to force their way through, they would not be able to stop them unless there were cultivators of the same generation. If he had enough time, he could infect them with devil chi one by one. However, he would not be able to watch so many array daos at once. Zhang Yan smiled and said, but I won't make things difficult for you. He opened his hand and rays of spiritual light shot out. In a split second, hundreds of talismans flew out one by one and lined up in the sky. He said, Master Sima, you can order people to place these talismans on the Tao of formation, this person will not be able to pass through. Sima Quan said happily, if Jinren bestows the talisman, then there will be no problem. He stretched out his hand and took all the talismans. Seeing that Zhang Yan had nothing else to say, he bade farewell and left. Then, he released a spiritual boat and rushed to the nearest array path. According to his original plan, he was going to send a message to all directions and order his clones to guard the Tao of formation. However, since he had received these talismans, he had to make a trip personally. After traveling for a few days, he suddenly felt a familiar aura. His heart moved and he turned in a direction. From afar, he saw a handsome young Taoist with black hair and a white robe standing on a meteorite. He immediately came out of the spiritual boat and floated forward to greet him. He cupped his hands and said, so it's Sect Master Shui. Is there something you need me to do? Shui Dingyuan said, there is something I need to ask fellow Taoist Sima. Sima Quan said, Jinren, please speak. Shui Dingyuan said, from what you said, the two Gong brothers are still alive. Sima Quan said, yes. Although Wanderer Rao imprisoned them, he didn't kill them. He promised to release them after 100 years. Shui Dingyuan said with a deep meaning, this generation has a deep relationship with the Gong family of the mountain and sea realm. Although they have long broken off contact, if the two sides were to contact each other again, it might not be a good thing for the 9 continents. Sima Quan's eyes flickered and he said, I understand Sect Master Shui's meaning. However, I have a question. These two have special techniques and may not need pure violet spiritium to cultivate. Why don't I let them sign a contract and use them for me? Shui Dingyuan shook his head and said, these two do have some value. However, based on what they have done in Yuliangism, even if they are willing to join us, it will only be for the time being. In their hearts, they will definitely not be satisfied. Furthermore, there are countless people of their generation in the mountain and sea realm. Even if nothing happens now, something unforeseen will happen in the future. At present, the sects of the 9 continents were undoubtedly the most powerful forces in the mountain and sea realm. The nations of the eastern wasteland were nominally allies, but because they didn't have the battle prowess of mortal metamorphosis cultivators, they were undoubtedly inferior. Only if 1 or 2 Violet Yang realm cultivators could they possibly change the situation. If the Violet Yang profound cultivators were from the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland, then it would be one thing. At least they had received the kindness of the 9 continents, and had joined forces to fight against the enemy. However, the Gong brothers were different. They were harsh and merciless, and had a high cultivation base. It was unknown how long they could live. If they were left alone, then in a few thousand years, they would definitely have a huge impact on the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland. Even if they didn't say anything, they could do some small things behind the scenes. It wouldn't be impossible for the people of the eastern wasteland to view the 9 continents with enmity. The sects of the 9 continents wanted to control a lower realm that they could order around, not find an opponent for themselves. Sima Quan also understood the crux of the matter. Shui Dingyuan had asked him to discuss this matter in private, which clearly meant that the 9 continents didn't want to do it themselves. Instead, they wanted Rao and Bei to do it. He said, Taoist Shui, please tell the Taoists that I know what to do. Shui Dingyuan nodded and took out a jade slip from his sleeve. He said, there are many writings left behind by predecessors in this jade slip. Sect Master Yuan asked me to give them to you before I left. They may be of help to you in your cultivation. Sima Quan's heart moved. He solemnly took the scroll, bowed, and said, Taoist Shui, please thank Sect Master Yuan on my behalf. However, when he straightened up, he found that Shui Dingyuan had already disappeared, and he was still in the spiritual boat. Even with his ability, he couldn't tell if he had really met Shui Dingyuan just now or if Shui Dingyuan had planted sea serpent chi on him. He shook his head. He couldn't pry into the means of a mortal metamorphosis cultivator. Only when he became a genin demon one day would he be able to truly understand the mysteries behind it. He immediately circulated his mana and drove the spiritual boat forward. About 40 days later, he passed through the formation path and arrived at the original territory of Yuliangism. When he arrived, he immediately spread the news through his many clones and telephones. In the depths of the void sky, one of Sima Quan's clones was floating along with a star stone. Suddenly, his expression changed. He turned around and threw himself into a jade pot nearby. In the blink of an eye, his whole body disappeared into it. Not long after, the body of Taoist Quan Ming, which was Sima Quan's incarnation, shook and woke up from his deep meditation. He thought to himself, Yang Chuan is dead, and the other 3 emperors of the Qi accumulation palace are dead. It's not difficult to convince Wanderer Rao, but it's a little difficult to get rid of these 2. Not to mention that Wanderer Rao was a man of his word. Moreover, when one's cultivation reached a certain level, he would take promises very seriously. If he said that he would only imprison these 2 for 100 years, he would never go back on his word. This matter can't be done by Wanderer Rao, but Bei Xiangtong can. After thinking about it, he didn't waste any time. He left the cave residence and rode a black light. In a flash, he flew across the plains and mountains, heading towards a peak in the realm. After the cultivators of the 9 continents invaded the realm, Bei Xiangtong didn't dare to stay outside for fear of being implicated. He also hid in the Jade Pot small world. He and Wanderer Rao were serious people who signed the contract, so they didn't have to worry about harming each other. Furthermore, Wanderer Rao was generous enough to let him use his original cultivation place as a cave residence. Sima Quan's place of cultivation was not far from here. In less than an hour, he arrived at the peak. He landed on the ground and bowed in front of the cave abode, saying, "Is Emperor and in Quanling coming to visit?" After a while, the cave residence's stone door opened, and a voice came from inside. "Taoist Quan Ming, come in and talk." Sima Quan tidied up his robe and walked in. He was very familiar with this cave residence. After a few turns, he arrived at the main hall. He saw a blue-robed Taoist sitting on a high place. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Emperorin." Bei Xiangtong knew that this person in front of him was Rao Sanran's most trusted confidant, so he was very polite and invited him to take a seat before saying, "Taoist friend Quan Ming is here because of Taoist friend Rao?" Sima Quan chuckled and said, "I'm not here for the matter of Wanderer Rao. I'm here because I'm entrusted by someone." Bei Xiangtong was a little surprised. He looked at Sima Quan and his expression turned serious. There was a trace of caution in the depths of his eyes. He said, "May I know who it is?" Sima Quan chuckled and stood up. He bowed again and said, 9 Continents Netherworld Spring Sect Sima Quan greets Yuliangisms Bei Xiangzhen. Chapter 1444. When Bei Xiangtong heard of Sima Quan's identity, he couldn't help but feel shocked. However, he didn't show it on his face and asked in a deep voice, "Are you a cultivator of the 9 continents?" Sima Quan said, "That's right. When we learned that Junchen realm was about to attack us, the Venerables sent Sima Quan to Junchen realm to gather information." Bei Xiangtong's gaze was faint as he said, "In that case, the destruction of the 6 formations should be due to fellow Taoist?" Sima Quan didn't answer. Bei Xiangtong laughed at himself and shook his head, "What's the use of saying this now?" He sighed and asked, "What about Wanderer Rao?" Sima Quan said seriously, "Wanderer Rao has nothing to do with the 9 continents. He still doesn't know my identity." Bei Xiangtong was silent for a moment and asked slowly, "What's the result of the battle at Qi Accumulation Palace?" Sima Quan smiled and sat down. He said calmly, "The 9 continents won this battle. The 4 emperors of Qi Accumulation Palace are dead. Yang Chuan is dead." Even though he had expected this result, Bei Xiangtong was still slightly dazed. A few years ago, he was still besieging him with 4 emperors. How long had it been? Unexpectedly, he was already dead and his soul destroyed. At this moment, he felt a sense of relief for Sima Quan's appearance. It was in line with Wanderer Rao's judgment. As long as they didn't pose a threat to the 9 continents cultivators, they indeed didn't want to kill them all. Instead, they were willing to sit down and discuss. He calmed himself down and looked at Sima Quan, "Taoist Sima, you revealed your identity in front of me today. Do you have anything to say to me?" Sima Quan cupped his hands and said, "The Venerables sent me down to ask, what are the 2 Venerables' intentions? Are you seeking war or peace?" Bei Xiangtong shook his head and said, "I know myself. Since I've never fought against your side before, why would I do such a stupid thing now that the dust has settled? Naturally, I'm willing to seek peace." He was very clear that the 9 continents had the absolute advantage now. How would they dare to raise any conditions? It would be good enough if they could protect themselves. The so-called peace request was just a euphemism thrown out by the other party. It was no different from surrendering. Sima Quan nodded and said, "Since you are willing to make peace, then we can talk about the rest of the matter." Bei Xiangtong revealed a solemn expression. Loose Practitioner Rao and Sima Quan were even more familiar with each other, but Loose Practitioner Rao did not look for Sima Quan. Instead, he looked for Bei Xiangtong, which meant that the matter he wanted to discuss with Sima Quan was not that simple. Sima Quan said, "Your Excellency should know that after the unfettered cultivator captured the two Gong brothers, he imprisoned them here and used their qi and blood to support my and fellow Deng's cultivation. However, the unfettered cultivator had promised to release them after 100 years. Sima Quan thought that this was a little inappropriate. After all, these two were emperors. How could they let go of such humiliation? But if we can get rid of this trouble in the future, there will be much less trouble in the future." Bei Xiangtong's eyes narrowed. It wasn't difficult for him to understand the meaning of Jiu Zhou's words, but it was hard for him to judge what Jiu Zhou's intention was. Was he going to use them to deal with the Gong brothers, and then deal with him? Sima Quan saw that he had doubts. With a quick thought, he guessed what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "Shangzhen Bei, with the power of our 9 continents, so what if the Gong brothers come out? It's just that due to certain reasons, it's inconvenient for us to act. Besides," Sima Duo said, "if you don't do anything, how much return can you expect in the future?" Hearing this, Bei Xiangtong couldn't help but agree. Even Kong Ying and Yang Chuan were defeated. Even if the Gong brothers came out, they indeed couldn't pose any threat to the 9 continents. And after the collapse of Yuliangism and the Qi accumulation palace, everything would be pushed back to the beginning. Presumably, everything would have to follow the rules of the 9 continents. For example, things that were essential for cultivation like the clear purple spiritual aura would definitely be firmly controlled by the cultivators of the 9 continents. If he wanted to use it in the future, he would need their permission. And only by doing this, the other party might just now look at him in a different light. After weighing the pros and cons, he took a breath and agreed, "All right, I'm willing to solve this matter on behalf of your side. But now is not the time to act. Fellow Daoist Rao and I have signed a contract. I won't ruin his business. We can only act after the two are released 100 years later." Sima Quan said, 100 years is not a long time. Shangzhen only needs to remember this. Also, this must not be known by the scattered cultivators. With their temperament, if they know, they will most likely stop us. Bei Xiangtong said, "I know the severity of the matter. As long as your side doesn't mention it, I won't say a word." Sima Quan said, "The two Gong brothers are not weak. Now that true Lord Deng and I need to borrow their qi and blood to cultivate, we always feel that it's a little slow. Does Shangzhen Bei have any way to deal with this?" Bei Xiangtong was startled, then laughed and said, "So fellow Daoist is thinking about this magic treasure I have. Very well, I was originally planning to find an opportunity to give it to fellow Daoist Rao to repay the favor of him providing shelter for me. Today, I might as well give it to fellow Daoist Rao." He was someone who ascended from the lower realm, but there was a demonic sect in the smoke billow realm. In his early years, he obtained a magic treasure of unknown origin. It was not a weapon for killing, but it was used to assist in cultivation. With this treasure in hand, as long as there were enough cultivation materials, it could increase the cultivation of a demonic sect cultivator by several times. That day when he was chatting with Rao Sanren, he mentioned it occasionally, but he didn't want Sima Quan to hear it. However, this matter was also in line with his interests. After the two Gong brothers left, he still needed to deal with them. The more their strength was weakened, the more convenient it would be for him to do things. Thinking of this, he took out a vermilion red pill from his Qian Kun pouch and sent it forward with mana. Sima Quan received it. As soon as it touched his hand, he felt that this thing seemed to be breathing, trembling, and moving. The mana and spiritual opportunity in this body were also faintly activated. He nodded and kept it properly, then said, "In a few years, I will discuss the pros and cons with Rao Sanren. If Sanren Rao agrees, I can introduce you to a 9 provinces great Jinren." Bei Xiangtong's expression brightened and said, "As far as I know, your side is divided into several factions. May I know the identity of this person?" Sima Quan said, "It's not convenient for me to say the specifics, but whether it was Kong Ying or Yang Chuan, they both died in the hands of this person." When Bei Xiangtong heard this, his heart shook heavily. He knew very well how strong Kong Ying and Yang Chuan were. From this, he could infer how powerful this person Sima Quan was talking about was. His expression turned solemn and he cupped his hands, saying, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist Sima." At this moment, Zhang Yan was riding on the ferry and flying in the void. He didn't go to collect the spiritual opportunity of Ziqing. In the battle with the Qi accumulation palace, he didn't expend much mana and had already recovered. This time, he wanted to find the place that was imprinted in Kong Ying's divine will and see what was hidden in that secret cave. That day in the divine will, he had specially memorized the order of the stars in the sky. After some careful deduction and combining it with the star field map that Sima Quan had presented, he had almost found the place. Although it was in a remote barren heavenly domain, it wasn't too far from the heavenly domain governed by Yuliangism. He first used the Tao of formations to go to the middle heavenly domain of Jade Beam and then headed south according to the heavenly domain map. This place wasn't like the Qi accumulation palace where there were many scattered small Tao of formations. After leaving the middle heavenly domain, other than the faintly twinkling stars, there was only an empty and dead void. He estimated that if the place didn't change, then it would take 2 years to get there. Therefore, he transferred a strand of divine will into the ferry and closed his eyes to meditate. He didn't know how much time had passed, but it felt like only a moment. The spirit boat shook slightly, and he exited from the meditation. Looking up at the starry sky, he knew that he had arrived at the earthly realm. Looking around, he suddenly fixed his eyes on a lonely planet. However, although he saw this secret place in the divine will, he didn't know what Kong Ying would do with this place. He also didn't know if Kong Ying came here again. If Kong Ying had really obtained a fortuitous encounter here, then it was entirely possible that he would have emptied this place or simply destroyed this entire planet. As for what the inside looked like, he could only find out when he entered the cave. He first circled around the planet and carefully examined it. It wasn't that he was afraid of any powerful inhibition spells, but he was afraid that Kong Ying had set up some kind of trap that would cause the place to collapse if an outsider came here. That would be bad. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he retracted his dermic energy and Qi Ji to avoid accidentally collapsing the mountain on the surface. He exited the dermic boat and landed on Earth Star. As he was flying, he saw the cave that Kong Ying had stepped into before. At this moment, he landed right in front of the entrance of the cave. That day, in Kong Ying's divine will, he could only use his senses to observe the surroundings. It was as if there was a layer of separation. Now that he was here, it was different. This place had been abandoned for at least 100,000 years. Moreover, 10,000 years ago, there was a prohibition spell under his feet. It was just that he didn't know whether it was because the spiritual opportunity was exhausted or the spell was broken by someone. After standing there for a while, he lifted his foot and walked in. After 100 steps, he saw a wordless stone tablet in front of him. After observing it for a while, he said, "This should be left behind by Kong Ying after he left for the last time. He must have gained something after walking to this place and tried to copy it again." As his thoughts reached this point, his eyes slightly twitched. If it was really as he had guessed, there might be Kong Ying's divine will on it. He took 2 steps forward and tried to sense it. Sure enough, there was a weak strand of divine will within it. After a brief examination, it withdrew from it and the divine will also disappeared. A thought flashed across his mind, it seems like Kong Ying has never returned to this place after leaving that time. He waved his sleeves, walked around the stone tablet, and continued forward. As he went deeper, the number of forks increased. He followed the path of Tao in his memory, but he didn't give up on the other paths. He casually shot out talismans to explore the path. He wanted to see if there were any other places worth visiting other than what he saw in the divine will. After walking for 10 days, the path became wider. There was a ravine in front of him. He stopped and didn't go any further. He looked up and saw a crystal that was 1,000 feet in size floating there. Chapter 1445. The crystal was suspended high in the air, and there were countless thin threads connecting it to the top of the cave. There was a thick fog covering it, but the bottom was bottomless, like a bottomless abyss. Zhang Yan had seen this scene before in Kong Ying's Will of God. At that time, he had deduced that this item was not born naturally, but was man-made. But he was not sure what it was used for. After looking at it for a while, the item suddenly trembled heavily, and a weak spiritual vigor was attracted from the outside. All of it gathered in the crystal, and after a while, a wave of spiritual qi spread out, forming a cycle. He noticed that the spiritual vigor seemed to have changed when it entered the crystal, but he could not see it from the outside. The place where the thread went was covered by a thin layer of fog, but when he looked at it with his Dharma eyes, he could see clearly that the end of the thread was connected to a large red cocoon, and there were at least 1 million of them. These ancient monsters were similar to the python scale fish worm. They could absorb the light of the stars and use it for their own purposes. That was why they could continuously provide spiritual vigor to the crystal. This item is not simple, but it is hard to see what it is. He thought for a while and decided to find the cave where Kong Ying had isolated himself. As for the crystal, he could study it later. He looked down and saw that there were 2 ear holes at the bottom of the cliff. The place where Kong Ying went was the left ear hole, so he turned and walked towards the left. Walking down a gentle slope, he arrived at the entrance of the cave. He looked around cautiously, and after confirming that there were no restrictive spells, he walked into the cave. Once inside, the first thing he saw was a tall stone tablet. When he looked at it in the Will of God, there were no words on it. But now that he was standing here, he could see the faintly discernible words floating on it, like dust in the light. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep, and he knew that Kong Ying's opportunity lay here. He stared at the surface of the tablet for a while, and found that although the words were profound, they gave him a feeling that compared to the ones carved by the Golden Wand sect, it was a little shallower. This wasn't to say that the contents on the stele were definitely bad, but it could be determined from this that in terms of inheritance, the sect that left this stele behind was definitely inferior to the Golden Wand sect. However, the origins of Golden Wand sect were mysterious and there seemed to be a powerful expert hiding behind them. If this place was built by the natives of Great Dust World, then it naturally could not be compared. He casually laid down a warning array and sat down cross-legged. His mind sank into the broken jade and tried to deduce. More than 10 days later, he opened his eyes. The result was not out of his expectations. What was recorded on it was a cultivation method that could lead to the third realm. However, this cultivation method was not complete. He did not know if it was originally incomplete or if it was deliberately left behind. It was said that no one in Junqian realm could cultivate to the level of Kong Ying. This should not be a lie, because no sect had recorded such a person. Therefore, this cultivation method was either deduced out of thin air, or the person with this achievement had never revealed it to others. However, the possibility of this was too small. A cultivator's cultivation required a vast amount of external objects, and they also needed a proper cultivation method and a heavenly paradise. As long as one's cultivation reached a certain level, which one of them didn't have a background? It was impossible to cultivate in seclusion and achieve great results. Of course, if the person who left this cultivation method was not from Junqian realm, then it was a different matter. However, he thought that the possibility of this was very small. The contents of the words were similar to the cultivation methods of Junqian realm, so it should have come from the hands of the natives of this world. He sighed slightly. If Kong Ying had used these incomplete cultivation methods to sever his future and step into the third realm, it would not have been easy. No matter how similar the cultivation methods were, they were from other sections. If he wanted to use them, he would have to break through the original foundation. This was 10 times or even 100 times more difficult than cultivating the cultivation method. This person could be called the first person in the history of Junqian realm. He memorized this cultivation method and prepared to study it in detail when he went back. Although Qinsang school had cultivation methods to cultivate to the third realm of mortal metamorphosis, other methods could be used as a reference. Even if it was a cultivation method from other sects, it could be used as a reference. It could even be used to verify each other. The value was not small. Seeing that there was nothing else worth paying attention to in this cave abode, he got up and walked out. When he reached the door, he thought for a moment and released 100 formation flags to set up a formation. He also sent in some magic power to maintain its operation. This was not to stop others from entering, but to protect this cave abode and delay the decay of this place. He had benefited from this place, so this was his repayment. He strode out of the room, looked outside, and walked towards the right ear hole. The two ear holes were side by side and were not far from each other. Not long later, he entered the cave and saw a bronze round cauldron. The cauldron was as tall as a person. The cauldron's ears were not at the top, but at the two sides. It was big and graceful, hanging straight down to the ground. The cauldron's body was long, and the mouth was slightly open. The 3 legs of the cauldron were open, and it looked like a cup. The carvings on the cauldron were extremely beautiful, and the most eye-catching thing was the pair of long and narrow eyes in the center. It seemed to have been refined using special methods, and there was lightning hidden in it, as though it was concealing a godly might. Zhang Yan looked at it for a while and seemed to be deep in thought. He flicked his finger and injected a wisp of spiritual energy into the cauldron. Wisps of clear air came out from the mouth of the cauldron, and they slowly gathered at one spot, as though something was about to happen. However, something was missing, so it did not succeed. Just now, it dispersed. His eyes lit up, and he walked 2 steps closer. He saw that there were many treasures stored in the cauldron using special methods. These should be the leftovers from the previous refinement. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeves, and this time, he sent a wisp of clear spiritual energy into the cauldron. Once this chi entered, the entire cauldron buzzed, and there was the sound of dragons and phoenixes crying. The eyes on the cauldron also opened and closed. After an hour, a white light soared into the sky, illuminating the entire cave, and condensed into a pill the size of a grain of rice at the top. With a thought, the pill floated down as if it was under his control. He held it in his hand and examined it for a while. He could not help but smile, and looked at the cauldron again. He nodded and said, "With this item, this trip was really not in vain." He could already see that this item was used to gather the great medicine used by the mortal molting cultivator. The 9 continents also had the method to concoct great medicine, but during the period of the Donghua 16 sects, the clear spiritual energy had been used up, and could only be shelved. Later on, when they arrived in the mountain and sea realm, the cultivators of the 9 continents were busy conquering everywhere, establishing their own sects, and guarding against cultivators from beyond the heavens. They simply did not have the time to do such a thing. Furthermore, to concoct such an item, not to mention the use of many external ingredients, it could easily take hundreds or even thousands of years. It was better to just use the clear spiritual energy. But with this cauldron, it was different. All he needed to do was throw in the clear spiritual energy, precious external ingredients, and a mortal molting cultivator to concoct it. He flicked his sleeves, and the cauldron was sucked into his pocket world. Then he turned back to the outside world and stood in front of the crystal. This time, he did not observe from afar, but slowly floated up. At the same time, he did his best to restrain his magic, so that the spiritual energy would not overflow and destroy the place. When he got closer, he discovered something different. There was actually a strand of divine will hidden within. He was slightly surprised. Just now, when I was observing, I did not notice it. It is obvious that the person who left behind the divine will is close to me. Let me take a look and see if I can find out the origin of this place. With a thought, he immersed his mind into it, and observed the strand of divine will. But in the next moment, he retreated from it, and had a rough idea of the cause and effect. This Earth Star was originally owned by an ancient sect in the Junqin realm, guarding Green Cave. This sect was not passed down from one sect, but was formed by several sections. Their goal was to fight against Lord Yuhu. These people knew that they were no match for this dragon monarch, so they wanted to gather everyone's power to concoct a treasure. Not only were the people who participated in this matter extraordinary, but the price they invested was also shocking. For this matter, they did not hesitate to extract the spiritual opportunity of a dozen heavenly regions, and captured hundreds of ferocious monsters in the virtual sky. In order to find a suitable vessel to carry the precious fetus, they finally found the crystal. The origin of this item was not simple. It was the heart of Lord Yuhu's second son, Changchun. What was strange was that this person was willing to take it out. At that time, the person with the highest cultivation of guarding Green Cave was Taoist Shi Wu. Under this person's leadership, everyone hid in this barren heaven region to concoct the treasure. Initially, everything went smoothly, but on the day the treasure was concocted, there was an accident. Taoist Shi Wu did not know what his motive was, but he actually withdrew at the most crucial moment, causing all the previous efforts to go to waste. Not only that, he also took away a few key treasures, and flew away on the spot, his whereabouts unknown. After this incident, the rest of the rulers were disheartened. In order to concoct this treasure, they had almost exhausted their vitality. As they were afraid that Lord Yuhu would come looking for them, they did not dare to stay any longer. They hurriedly left and went into hiding. Since then, not only did the guarding Green Cave no longer exist, but it also implicated more than a dozen sects from prosperity to decline. Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. There was something strange about this incident, as though there was a hand pushing it from behind the scenes. The biggest suspect was naturally that Lord Yuhu. However, this was a matter of the past, the truth had long been covered by many layers of fog, and he did not need to find out. He turned to look at the heart of Changchun. From the will of the god, he knew that when this item was taken out just now, its size was comparable to the Earth star. Later on, after Taoist Shi Wu and these cultivators had concocted it and purified it, it became what it was today. This was a good treasure fetus. If one brought it back and concocted it diligently, it was not impossible for it to become the most precious treasure of the sect. After Kongming arrived, he did not take it away. This was not because he looked down on these two items, but because he did not want to be involved in the cause and effect of this. Zhang Yan smiled indifferently. He was not afraid of this. It was as if this ownerless item, if it was useless to him, he would not casually touch it. However, if it could help him or strengthen his sect, then he would not hesitate at all. So what if he was involved in the cause and effect? In the future, he would cut it with a sword. He raised his hand and held the heart of Changchun in his hand. Chapter 1446. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go. Say net, providing you with exciting novels to read. As Zhang Yan held on to Changchun's heart, he felt a faint struggling force coming from above. It shook the Xian Qi hand and caused smoke to surge. He was very clear that this was not because Changchun's heart still had its own will. It was because this object was connected to the red cocoons. These millions of strange creatures saw this heart as a treasure. Now that they felt that it was being moved, they naturally resisted. This precious fetus was between a living thing and a vessel. No matter how powerful it was, if no one refined it and no one poured spiritual vigor to nourish it, it would still rot after tens of thousands of years. The reason why it was still the same was because a Taoist who participated in refining the treasure could not bear to see his efforts go to waste. He secretly returned here, and it was also this person who left his divine will here. Because of the power of Lord Jade Pot, he did not dare to take the dragon heart away. Hence, he set up these void sky strange creatures here and connected them together to maintain its spiritual vigor. This was an ingenious use of the dragon's heart's ability to shift spiritual vigor. Not only could it maintain itself from being damaged, but it could also nourish these strange creatures on this barren planet. Over time, these strange creatures would naturally find ways to maintain the dragon's heart after receiving the benefits. Zhang Yan did not care about the struggle. With a slight push of mana, the Xian Qi hand clenched and pulled the dragon heart from the countless threads. Then, he threw it into the small world. As soon as the Qi movement here was broken, the surroundings suddenly trembled. All the void sky strange creatures on the entire planet started to riot. The red cocoons hidden under the sand broke open one by one, and strange creatures flew out. They had heads, limbs, facial features, and long tails. However, they were only half a foot long and were extremely ugly. Their eyes occupied most of their heads, and their bodies were pink as if they were skinned. From time to time, they would let out a high-pitched hissing sound. This creature was called Ho by the people of Junchen realm. It only needed to absorb the sun, moon, and starlight to survive, but it liked to eat the brains of living beings. It often wreaked havoc on Earth's star, which was not guarded by any powerful beings. It was one of the more savage types of the void sky variant. Actually, this monster didn't look like this at first. It still had gorgeous hair growing on its body, but after receiving the dragon heart's essence chi, it lay dormant here. This was to allow its body to undergo a deeper transformation. This process could take hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, but now that the dragon heart had been lost, it was forced to stop. Naturally, they had to come out and find the culprit. Zhang Yan used his transcendence vision to peer through the layers of barriers, and he could see countless marquises charging towards him. He didn't want to fight here, otherwise, not only would he cause the cave to collapse, but the entire Earth star would also be affected. With a thought, baleful essence appeared around him, wrapping around his entire body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a red-crowned crane, flapping its wings and flying out. He could use this kind of transformation technique when he was at the 5th transformation of strength path. However, at his level, such transformations were not very useful in battle, so he had never used it in front of others. It was suitable for him to use it now. The Marquis race had lived on Earth's star for tens of thousands of years. They had already dug through every corner of the planet. The forked tunnels that Zhang Yan saw earlier were actually used by these beasts to make it easier for them to travel up and down the planet. At this moment, they were using these shortcuts to obstruct him. Zhang Yan, however, did not pay any attention to him and only cared about flying towards the exit. Those marquises jumped out one by one. They tried to tear off the red-crowned crane's wings, but they were blocked by the baleful essence. Not only were they unable to tear the wings apart, but they were also killed by the fierce energy contained within. In the tunnel, the corpses of these monsters fell like raindrops. Although Zhang Yan had turned into a red-crowned crane, his speed was extremely fast. He quickly flew out of the cave, and then he leaped up to a void of spiritual light. When he reached a high place, he circled in the air, and with a burst of black smoke, he changed back to his original form. Looking back down, he saw a red cloud rising above Earth's star. It was a group of millions of marquises chasing after him. He stood on the spot without moving, waiting for these ferocious beasts to charge close to him. With a thought, torrential watery light surged out from behind him. With a sweep, all the ferocious beasts that were charging over were swept into it. After that, the true light flashed and vanished. At this moment, smoke and dust covered the sky at the back of Earth's star, and mountains collapsed one by one. Not long after, a monster that was 10,000 feet tall stood up. It had short legs and long arms, red skin, a thin tail, and a bone armor ring around its neck and shoulders. Its face was similar to that of a human ape, but it was bald and there was no hair. Its eyes were glowing with a deadly green light, but its cheeks were swollen, and saliva kept dripping from its mouth, as if it had swallowed something. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. He knew that there must be a tribe king in every alien race, but he did not sense the presence of the tribe king's chi. He thought that the tribe king's concealment technique was very high, but now that he saw the thing in its mouth, he realized that it was because of the help of this treasure. This Earth star was the secret place where the green cave was guarded, so it was normal for one or two treasures to be passed down. One of the marquises couldn't speak, so he turned toward Zhang Yan and let out a muffled groan. Then he raised his hands high into the air, then stamped his feet and leaped up into the air. In the blink of an eye, the land beneath his feet cracked, and the mountains collapsed. Zhang Yan looked on calmly. He stood still and did not move. He only circulated his mana and a tall demonic shadow slowly appeared behind him. He leaned forward and stared at the ground below. Then, he gently inhaled. Some of the Ho Kings immediately sensed that something was wrong. They tried to resist, but it was useless. In just a moment, their souls were dragged out and fell into the mouth of the demonic shadow. Their huge bodies swayed a few times, and they fell powerlessly from the sky, crashing onto the Earth star with a loud bang. Zhang Yan could sense that the Marquise's life force had been severed, so he retracted his magic power, and the devil's shadow slowly faded away. He then performed an incantation gesture, and the watery light swept the Marquise's body into his minor world, where he prepared to take it back to the mountain and sea realm. Suddenly, he saw a flash of light from the corner of his eye. He turned his gaze and saw a pearl that was as big as a mountain. It was obviously the treasure that the Marquise just now had in his mouth. But after he died, the pearl had rolled out. With a thought, the Xian Qi outside his body immediately formed into a huge hand. It reached down and grabbed the pearl. After a brief examination, he found that the pearl could only be used to conceal one's aura. Apart from that, it had no other use. After thinking for a while, he more or less understood the use of this item. With such a precious pearl in the Blue Guard Cave, it could conceal all the spiritual aura on Earth Star, making it impossible for Lord Yuhu to find it. He shook his head. So what if he couldn't find it? Trouble arose from the outside, and chaos arose from within. Lord Yuhu didn't even show his face, and the Blue Guard Cave had already collapsed. No matter how powerful a sect was, if there was internal discord, they would have already lost half the battle before external enemies even attacked. Just like the day of Yuliangism, if all the rulers rushed to help, the cultivators of the 9 continents might not lose, but they would definitely pay a heavy price. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and kept the pearl as well. Then, he cast a spell and summoned a palace from the small world. He sat down in the main hall and took out the dragon heart that was 1,000 feet in size. His gaze focused on it, and he began to think about how to blood bond with it. He didn't lack true weapons, so he wanted to blood bond with it into a treasure that could protect the Xianyuan sect. In reality, this kind of treasure could be called the treasure of a sect. There was no clear division of levels, it all depended on the cultivation of the person who made it and the background of the sect behind it. Generally speaking, the treasure of a sect could be roughly divided into 3 types. The first type was extremely powerful and had the ability to split the heavens and split the earth. If it was used, it could immediately change the situation, or perish together, so that the enemy would not dare to act rashly. For example, Qinsang School's Void Essence Mysterious Cave, and Nether Spring Sect's 9 Underworlds River, belonged to this type. However, there were advantages and disadvantages. Once the treasure was powerful, only the cultivators with profound cultivation in the sect could use it. Without such people, even the best treasure would only be a decoration. Normally, this kind of treasure would not appear in a battle between cultivators, but was placed there to deter other sections. The second type was the treasures that matched the techniques and abilities of one's own sect. For example, Shaoqing Sect's Taizhua Sword, Blood Soul Sect's Blood God Waterfall, Yuanshan Sect's Mind Returning Great Spirit Tablet, and even Jiling Sect's 9 Spirit Banner. This kind of treasure depended on how the wielder used it. If used well, it could even be more terrifying than those treasures that could easily destroy the heavens and the earth. As for the third type, it was more inclined to defend and assist. Yuxiao School's True One Jade Cliff had the ability to stabilize the continent. Yuan Yang Sect's Profound Yang Wall could increase spiritual opportunity. It was rumored that the Lishan sect's signature treasure that Taoist Yuling was trying to refine was also of this type. Of course, apart from the above 3 types, it did not mean that there were no other options. The first person to refine the treasure would often have to make a decision based on the materials. It was not something that could be done as one pleased. Looking at the dragon heart, Zhang Yan already had some ideas in his mind. However, there were many problems that needed to be solved later. First of all, the most important thing to refine this treasure was that a dragon heart alone was not enough. Right now, it was only a treasure embryo, and he needed to find more materials. He reached out and pressed on the pivot in the hall, pouring magical power into it. The entire palace shook, and its speed suddenly increased as it continued to advance deeper into the wildland realm. Before Yang Chuan died, in order to protect the disciples of the Qi Accumulation Palace, he took the initiative to offer an occult orb, which contained the Qi Accumulation Palace's 100,000 years of accumulation. It was the perfect time to search for suitable materials, so that he would not have to go back to the mountain and sea realm to search for them. Another 3 years passed on this journey. With the guidance of Yang Chuan's divine will, Zhang Yan found the occult orb very smoothly. On the surface, it looked no different from an ordinary meteorite. Without guidance, even if someone passed by it, they would not be able to notice anything unusual. Therefore, it was not easy to find an occult orb. Zhang Yan left the palace and came to the front of the occult orb. Following Yang Chuan's instructions, he performed a few hand seals. The surface of the meteorite flashed, and a beam of light shot out from the hole. It must be the entrance. He floated up and stepped into the beam of light. His vision blurred, and he found himself in an incomparably magnificent hall.